To breathe, feeling like she was drowning. She was literally smoking herself to death, and no matter what she tried, she couldn't stop until she switched to e-cigarettes. Since then, her health has improved dramatically. It is likely, as a GP who's looked after patients like this before, that she would not be here today unless she broke the law and switched to e-cigarettes. It's likely that she would be dead. Look at Judith now. Look how full of life she is. And when you consider what attitude we should take towards e-cigarettes and nicotine, think about her and the many Judiths around the country. Professor Ron Borland of the Australian Cancer Council recently shared with me the latest data on how many people regularly use e-cigarettes in Australia. This was presented at the SNRT, a World Conference on Tobacco in Chicago. As of late 2014, it is close to 15% of smokers and recent ex-smokers. It was 7% when it was last measured in 2013. So it is exploding despite our draconian laws. This equates to almost 500,000 people, which are also 500,000 voters. Schedule 7 poisons law specifically exempts tobacco, but there is no exemption for nicotine e-cigarettes. Given that not one e-cigarette sold in Australia comes from a tobacco company, this amounts to enshrined protection of big tobacco in law. But how are you going to enforce this law when it is so massively broken, this monstrous law that protects the cigarette market and keeps people smoking? A law that cannot be enforced makes a mockery of the law and leads potentially to embarrassment to the government, especially if you may be faced in the future with a civil disobedience movement with massive media attention. A simple stroke of the pen to legalise low-strength nicotine liquids to even the playing field could change all this. It costs nothing. In fact, as small vaping shops spring up around the country to take business away from cigarettes, vape shops that act as quit smoking centres everywhere, you will get more jobs, more taxes and a healthier population with less healthcare costs. Our vision is that we allow the rapid pace of innovation to continue with e-cigarettes with only light touch regulation. All of these small companies are fighting right now to make better and better substitutes for smoking, and if we don't stop them with the heavy hand of over-regulation, if we allow them to make more and more enjoyable and satisfying substitutes for smoking, eventually there may be no point to smoking anymore. Smoking could simply become obsolete.
Thank you. Ms. Wolters.
Oh, hello. Dr. Danko has said a lot of what I would have said, so I can cut out a lot. It's been an incredible education for me the last 2 years, reading about vaping and associated research and topics. And I've sort of noticed that over time, the war on the war on smoking has become a war on tobacco companies, smokers, nicotine, and now it's nicotine. If I use nicotine, it hurts no one else, so it can hardly be called a harmful addiction to have. You know, I don't go in and rob banks or anything else. So it's a personal problem of mine, and I should be left alone to get on with it. But that's one thing that really worries me. And the government could be poised to make a mistake they made in 1991 when they banned Swedish snus in Australia, or for sale in Australia. And I only found out about smokeless tobacco products after I'd started vaping and researching that. And if I had had access to Swedish snus, which is considered to be even safer than vaping, 24 years ago, I may have even stopped smoking that long ago. And but the precautionary approach won. And so there's a lot of people still smoking now. Apparently in the late 80s it was actually banned, and a lot of people that were using it went back to smoking. So the government relented and allowed import, but I'm not sure about that ban 100%. What I find most offensive, though, is the lack of empathy for people in poverty. Like some of the figures from a report called Smoking and Disadvantage in 2013, published by the Australian National Preventative Health Agency. The figures then were 15.1% for average across the general population. People experiencing unemployment, it went up to 27.6%. People with a mental illness, it doubled. Sole parents, it went up to 36.9%, more than double. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, 47.7%. People living with psychosis, 66%. Prisoners, 74%. People experiencing homelessness, 77%. Young people in custody, 79%, and people with substance use disorders, 85%. So when tobacco taxation increases, every one of them is actually driving these vulnerable groups in society further into poverty, to a place where they're even less likely to be able to give up smoking, because I know what it's like when your bill comes and you think, oh, how am I going to pay this? Oh, I better have a cigarette. Where's my cigarettes? You know, you don't think, oh, I better stop smoking now so I can pay this bill. That's not the way human beings work. And I find it morally offensive, viscerally offensive, that these groups are being driven further into poverty. I find it very offensive. Apart from that, what was I? Oh, yes. And the wonderful thing about vaping is that I gave up smoking for I had 3 attempts on Champix. I tried everything else, but 3 attempts on Champix. I managed to give up 3 months on the last attempt. And then as soon as I was stressed, I went back to smoking. I stopped smoking 18 months ago, last Monday. And if I get stressed, I don't have to have a cigarette. I just vape and it's enough. And those Champix attempts would have cost the taxpayer at least $1,000. It costs the taxpayer nothing for me to permanently stop smoking now. So, yes, and what else was I going to say? Oh, that's probably enough.
We'll come back to questions. Ms. Stone, you there?
A statement, but I'm just here giving evidence because I smoked for 30 years. I had decided that I wasn't going to attempt to quit anymore. I'd weighed up the negatives and with the positives and decided that I was going to take the risk and enjoy, the quality of life I'd been enjoying until I didn't. So e-cigarettes came along sort of accidentally. I was introduced to them by a friend. I didn't believe that they would help me give up smoking, but that's what happened. Just naturally, I enjoyed using e-cigarettes more, and I'm here because I'm breaking the law by not smoking and using e-cigarettes as a safer alternative. And I've been vaping for 3 years now, and I've learnt a lot about, the regulations, and I've heard the media, the tone in the media, directed by, I think, largely by tobacco control bodies, putting a negative light on e-cigarettes and scaring people off them. And because I work in homelessness, the figures that Judith gave seem underestimated to me. I would say 95% of the people that I work with are smokers. And as I said in my submission, it makes me really frustrated and very sad that I can't support them to enjoy better health and save, money for actually surviving instead of turning it on smoking by switching to a safer alternative. It's illegal for them to do that. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Gordon, have you got an opening statement?
Yes, I've prepared a statement.
You go ahead.
I'm a 54-year-old registered nurse. I smoked for 35 years and made over a dozen attempts to quit in that time, all of which failed, and I eventually quit trying to quit. But I picked up an electronic cigarette nearly 4 years ago and haven't smoked a cigarette since. It was incredibly easy. My health has improved dramatically, and my doctor now considers me an ex-smoker. Unfortunately, my government considers me a criminal because the nicotine I use in my devices was reclassified as a Schedule 7 poison in 2008 when electronic cigarettes first began to surface in Australia. I can import it from overseas, but I am breaking the law as soon as I take possession of it. To make matters worse, I recently converted my next-door neighbour to vaping, a woman in her late 60s with early-stage emphysema. She quit smoking completely within 2 weeks once I set her up with good equipment and liquid. Unfortunately, she doesn't have the internet and can't source her own nicotine from international sellers online, so I sell her some of my own at cost price. This makes me a trafficker of a prohibited substance, black marketeer. My crime is that I gave up smoking the wrong way and am assisting others to commit the same felony. Prohibition of the sale of liquid nicotine in Australia was based on fears that electronic cigarettes might renormalise smoking and act as gateway products to tobacco, leading to higher smoking rates. These were purely theoretical concepts which have since been thoroughly debunked. All the evidence shows that electronic cigarettes act only as a gateway out of smoking, not the other way around. Over 3 million Australian smokers have been denied legal access to an alternative to smoking, which is widely accepted now as being at least 95% safer. And this catastrophe happens because we have a government which is willing to enact legislation based on nothing more than unfounded fears and suspicions. I have made a choice to continue using recreational nicotine, but not to smoke. I've made that decision based on a well-informed understanding that nicotine without the smoke, the tar and the hundreds of other chemicals in cigarettes is no more dangerous than caffeine. I enjoy vaping just as I enjoy drinking coffee. In Australia, the only form of recreational nicotine that I can legally purchase is the most dangerous form, smoking tobacco. Nasal snuff and Swedish snus have also been banned for sale here, despite decades of evidence showing them to be virtually harmless. This is not responsible legislation. This is an outrage. The only rational response for someone like me is non-compliance and a life of crime, apparently. At least it will be a longer and healthier life than if I obey the law and go back to smoking. If I complied with nanny state regulations, I would take my neighbour a carton of cigarettes instead of an illegal bottle of nicotine juice and assist her to advance her emphysema. Obviously, this would be unconscionable. We have no choice but to protect ourselves from those in government who think it's their job to protect us from ourselves. They have no idea the harm they are doing, eliminating all the competition to big tobacco companies. How can there possibly be a wrong way to give up smoking? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have you got any questions, Chris?
Yes, just a couple.
You want to go first?
No, after you.
I'll be a while. So.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
just a
go
couple
ahead.
of questions. I'll just direct this to the witnesses generally. Just in terms of the cost of the delivery systems for the e-cigarettes, the hardware and the software as you describe it. So, I think Dr. Danko, could I just get just a rough guide? I can't see anything in the submission. What's the cost of the?
Sure.
Yeah.
Disposable cigar-like. I can't do props, sorry. But a disposable cigar-like is probably around the $4 mark. But no one uses them here because they're illegal, because they contain nicotine. So a small e-cigarette, let's say a first generation one that most people started using, you're probably looking at about $30. bigger capacity battery, you're probably looking at somewhere around $50, $60, and then they can go all the way up to $300 as something that's quite fancy or handmade. That's the hardware. Generally speaking, you probably get about 6 months life out of one device, but everyone needs at least two, because while one's on charge, you need another one. Then you've got peripherals like coils, so disposable parts that keep them going. They probably work out to about $2 each, and they would last about 2 weeks. Then you're talking about e-liquid. So most vapers would vape somewhere between 3 mil a day and 6 mil a day. Some could be 1 mil, some could be 10. But you're looking at somewhere between, if you DIY like I do, you're probably looking at about 10 cents a mil. But that's buying in bulk. I've got a big bottle in my freezer. But generally, you're looking at between 50 cents and $1 a mil, and that's with or without nicotine.
And you said 6 mils a day?
I'd say average between 3 and 6 mil per day. I vape 5 mil per day.
Okay.
So yeah, significant cost savings compared to smoking. Often a tenth or less of the cost for ongoing e-liquid, which is the main consumable.
If I was smoking now, I would be spending more than $30 a day on cigarettes, and I spend probably $1 a day on consumables, and then need to reinvest once every 6 months.
And the e-liquid is currently available on prescription, is that correct?
So look, there is a loophole which says that you can have 3 months supply of nicotine e-liquid if there is a prescription from a doctor for the purposes of smoking cessation. But even under that scheme, we are not using it for cessation. We're using it for ongoing recreational use, and the law doesn't state that that is allowed. Secondly, even when someone goes and tries to get a prescription from a doctor, we've had people who've approached 15, 20, I'm not sure how many.
One guy did 48 doctors.
And not one was willing to prescribe him, do that prescription, because it's an irregular thing. So it's something that is a loophole that's there that a few people know about, but it's not very widespread knowledge. And most doctors, as a GP, most doctors feel very uncomfortable about prescribing something irregular.
Even if it's for the purpose of getting people away from smoking, which is a
yes,
harmful
because
thing.
you see, they're taking the responsibility for something which someone has sourced overseas of uncertain quality or that sort of thing. They're taking that responsibility when they do a prescription, and doctors are very, very hesitant to expose themselves to any sort of legal risk or doing something that's not what everybody else does.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Wodak.
Thank you. Could I just add 2 points to what my friends and colleagues have already said, and that is that I'm sure we all know that smoking is not equally spread throughout the community. It's very much concentrated in economically and socially disadvantaged groups. So the savings that Dr. Danko has talked about are critical to people who have very low incomes and wealth. These are people for whom smoking contributes disproportionately to inequalities in health. So the fact that they can still get their nicotine but at lower cost, economic cost to them, is very significant in health policy terms. We've only talked about the economic savings to the individual smokers or vapors. We haven't talked about the economic savings to the community. But of course, if people are using a device to ingest nicotine that is a fraction of the risk that tobacco cigarettes are, then there's also significant economic savings to the Treasury and to the taxpayers. So although all up, e-cigarettes are a significant economic boon to former smokers as they are to taxpayers and the Treasury.
Mm-hmm. Look, whilst I certainly take the point that ingesting the e-liquid in the vapour form seems to be safer than smoking cigarettes and tobacco, I couldn't see anything in here which sort of indicates that the vaping and ingesting this liquid into your lungs is necessarily completely without some drawbacks, medically speaking. Are there any studies that go to that issue?
Yes, look, we have to, I would agree with you that we don't have long-term studies on the potential effects of e-cigarette vapour on the lungs. What we can say, though, is that if you examine the toxicology of the substances which are released, that many of the substances are completely absent compared to cigarettes, and that most of the rest are in quantities 9 to about 450 times less. So there is, when you're talking about roughly 1% of the emissions, so when you're talking about a 100-fold decrease, and most of these things are actually, when you separate out all the components and you look at well-studied occupational health and safety laws and healthy occupational health and safety studies, pretty much all of them are below the sort of exposure limits for those. So it seems to me a scientifically untenable proposition to say that they could be anywhere near as harmful as smoking, and we always have to compare it to the reference product, which is smoked cigarettes.
May I read a short paragraph out of the recently published National Centre for Smoking Cessation and Training report, and I will table that. It's a very short paragraph which answers the question there.
Yes.
It was only released last week, so you haven't got it yet. So it says, is nicotine dangerous? Nicotine does not cause smoking-related disease, such as cancers and heart disease. These are caused by other chemicals found in tobacco smoke. Nicotine is addictive. However, it is why people continue to smoke despite knowing about the harmful effects of tobacco. Nicotine in e-cigarettes poses little danger to adult users. In order to prevent accidental poisonings of children, e-cigarettes and e-liquids should be stored away safely, just as you would with household cleaning products and medicines, including NRT. This report is a report that goes from the national body to the smoking cessation services within the UK, with all of the background information and work as far as the science goes. So I'm happy to table that if that's okay.
And can you tell us...
That's separate from this? What do you say?
That is the one that you've just received that today. Sorry, I know.
Yes, no, that's accepted. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you.
And can you tell us who the National Centre for Smoking Cessation and Training is?
Sure. They would be the equivalent to the Australian that Colin Mendelsohn works for.
It's a UK.
It's the UK version of the advisory group that advises stop smoking services. So it would be like our peak body that advises quit services,
Quit Victoria,
quit New South Wales, smoking cessation specialists.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
Okay, thank you. I've got quite a lot of questions, so this will go for a while. A couple of you mentioned quitting smoking the wrong way. What is the wrong way? What are you referring to?
The illegal way.
The illegal way.
Using vaping.
Using vaping. Why is that wrong?
Because it's illegal to possess the liquid nicotine that you use in the devices.
So is there a right way to quit?
Well, the way, yeah, using nicotine replacement therapy or prescribed drugs like Champix or any way that the government has sanctioned is the right way.
Oh, I see. Okay. So just quitting, just cold turkey, or nicotine gum is the right way. Champix is the right way. What else is there?
Well, there's all the over-the-counter nicotine replacement products like nicotine gum and lozenges and the inhalers and stuff that you can buy in the supermarket.
And a chemical called Zyban too, a pharmaceutical.
You'll need to speak up, Miss Wolters.
Oh, sorry, a pharmaceutical called Zyban as well. I can't remember the chemical name for it.
So they're all the right way,
Yep.
and vaping is the wrong way.
Can I just say the nicotine that is in chewing gum and inhalers and lozenges and whatever, nicotine patches, it's exactly the same nicotine that we're using in the juice in electronic cigarettes. So it's in those forms. It's available in supermarkets, and kids as young as 12 can buy it. But suddenly, when we use it in electronic cigarettes, it's the work of the devil. You know, you can't have it both ways. Either it's a harmless chemical in these amounts, or else it's really dangerous, and we need to sort that out.
What's the origin of the ban on the nicotine that you use in your what do you call them, e-cigarettes?
The origin of the ban?
Yes.
Well, it happened in 2008, and it was due to fears that electronic cigarettes would be gateway products to smoking.
Right.
But these were unfounded fears. That's pretty much why it happened.
States vary too. When I imported my first nicotine at the end of March 14, there was actually a page on the internet that said it was legal to import 24 milligram nicotine liquid into Australia, and then that disappeared. And suddenly I was sort of going, suddenly I was importing something that wasn't legal when originally I had been importing something legal.
I think the other reason is that it's not approved by the Therapeutic Goods Administration. It's not in a pharmaceutical product, approved product. So, and the process of approval through the TAG is, or TGA, sorry, is extremely expensive. E-cigarettes are a consumer-driven industry. They're not a big pharmaceutical product, so it's prohibitively expensive for small companies to have their products approved by the TGA.
Are all the other products, the other nicotine products, approved by the TGA?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Even the ones that are sold in the supermarkets?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Have any of the Nicotine Alliance members, or indeed anybody that you know of, been prosecuted for importing nicotine into the country?
So as far as I know, there's only been one prosecution for possession, and that was
possession, not for importing.
Possession, yeah. I don't believe so. I can happy to be corrected, but one prosecution for possession, and that was someone who was running a vape shop and running a petition to try and change the laws in Queensland, and the police came round to his shop because he was selling vaping equipment and liquids. And I think the assumption was that they were trying to get him for selling, and they couldn't do that, so they decided to charge him for possession.
And what's your understanding of how common vaping is in Australia?
Well, as I said, from the latest figures in 2014, it's roughly or close to 15% of the smoking and recent ex-smoking population. So amongst those people. So it is increasingly common, and that's it's increasing all the time. So we're now more than a year after that data was collected. So I'm sure it's bigger than that. So it's becoming more and more common. A lot of people know other people who do it. It's the law to try and stamp it out has clearly been useless in its aims.
Although it's quite useful for preventing older people who are not internet savvy, and also people who are very poor or disadvantaged because of mental illness or being Aboriginal or whatever, having limited access or understanding of buying things over the internet. If we had vape shops like they do in the UK, it would be a lot easier for people who really need these products for their health to access them.
So your point is that there's a substantial civil disobedience going on. The law is largely not being enforced anyway, and but those who can't be civilly disobedient because of technology or finances or whatever are the losers out of this. Is that your proposition?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, okay, all right. So what's the situation in Western Australia? What's different about Western Australia from the rest of the country?
Well, in Western Australia, there's a legal case that's ongoing. A vendor, a man who was selling through the internet the actual devices and non-nicotine liquids, was prosecuted under the law that prevents selling, toys and products to entice young people that look like cigarettes. There's a law in most states, I think. So he was prosecuted under that law in 2011, I think. So that case is still ongoing. The sentence for the latest appeal, it will be handed down tomorrow, I think. So it's illegal to sell, basically it's illegal to sell the devices or anything in Western Australia.
Is it illegal to possess them?
No, it's not illegal to possess the e-cigarette device, but it's like all states, it's illegal to possess the nicotine e-liquid.
It's not illegal to import it, though, am I right there?
I think you need a prescription from your doctor to import. Oh, no, I think it's legal to import, but you need a prescription to possess it. So it's not illegal to import it, but it is illegal to possess it.
So it's illegal. It's not illegal to import it, so that's what everybody's doing it. But once they import it and take possession of it, they've broken the law. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And then in Western Australia, it's also illegal to
sell the hardware.
To sell the hardware, but it's not illegal to own it?
As far as I know, I don't think it's illegal to possess it.
Over the internet.
Or to import the device into Western Australia. Yes, yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right.
If I could just add that although there have been few prosecutions, the fact that there is a shroud of illegality hanging over e-cigarettes has undoubtedly dampened down the utilisation of e-cigarettes compared to, say, the United Kingdom, where there is a less oppressive legal environment for e-cigarettes, and there's much greater utilisation of e-cigarettes to the benefit of people in the United Kingdom.
Yes, I've read your submissions. That's interesting. We'll get on to that. What I'd like to do, just for the benefit of Hansard, I've had the benefit of reading your submissions, but for the benefit of Hansard, reading it into Hansard, and also for those people who are listening, is to know your personal stories and how you became vapors. Ms. Gordon, we haven't heard much from you. Have you got a story to tell us?
Yes, I smoked for 35 years. I made many quit attempts in that time. I tried patches, which just gave me rashes. I tried chewing gum and lozenges, which were useless. Inhalers tasted nasty. I was prescribed Champix by my doctor, and 2 weeks into that course, I was driving along the road and had this incredible urge to drive head-on into a semi-trailer that was coming. It was just bizarre the way that happened, and I had to pull over from the road and sit quietly for an hour. And I later found out that there have been a few thousand suicides as a result of people taking Champix. It was an absolutely terrifying drug. And my most successful attempt was when I quit cold turkey. I lasted a year, but I gained 10 kilograms in weight and were quite depressed and just as short of breath then as if I'd been smoking, and I ended up going back to smoking. So I was 50 years old and I was quite sick. I was smoking well over 40 cigarettes a day. My throat was killing me. I had palpitations, black rings under my eyes. I was just so desperate to give up. But the more stressed I got about it, the more I smoked. It's the way it sort of often goes with people. And I got onto the internet just looking for a miracle at that stage, and I found it with electronic cigarettes. I ordered, I started on a little cigar-like, which I ordered from overseas, and the first puff I took of that, I just knew this is the end of smoking. This is the end of it for the world, you know, this is going to take over smoking. And I have not smoked another cigarette since. And my doctor considers me an ex-smoker. I no longer get the 6-week bouts of bronchitis that I used to get 3 times every couple of years. My health has improved dramatically. So it's as if I've given up nicotine entirely. So that's my story.
Thank you. Ms. Wolters, we had a bit of a touch on your personal story, but give us a...
Yeah, my father got me to light cigarettes in the car for him from when I was about 5, but I didn't start using regularly until I earned my very first money at 14. And I smoked increasing amounts through my life. The first time I tried stopping smoking, I was actually probably only about 17 and I tried cold turkey. My next attempt, I enrolled in a pilot program, I think it was at the University of New South Wales, which was basically an aversion research into using aversion therapy for people to stop smoking, which didn't work. And I tried various cold turkey many times, then nicotine gum, I think, was the first thing. But anyway, I tried many nicotine replacement therapies. I tried Zyban, I tried Champix, I tried hypnosis. I basically tried everything. And that was for at least 45 years. I was trying everything. And at the end, I was smoking at least 50 Rolly cigarettes a day. I was...
50?
Yeah.
Rollies?
Yeah.
Oh.
I was very ill. I was dangerously depressed at that time. And I read about e-cigarettes and started looking, and I dual used. It took me 5 months because it was recommended to me that I use 24 milligram liquid at the start, and I read for 5 months and mainly smoked and used one like this, and then I realised that I actually needed very strong nicotine liquid. So I mixed my own at 36 milligrams, which is very strong, but that actually worked. And this was one that got me off smoking. Oh, sorry, I'm not allowed to do that, am I?
No, you are.
Sorry.
It's just that the Hansard won't record it.
Oh, good. Yeah, so that was, and I had to build, I was a fairly advanced vapor by then. I had to build my own coils for this. It's mechanical, it's not regulated, so it's a bit, you have to know what you're doing for safety. And mostly these days they're electronically regulated, so you can't blow yourself up. But these ones you have to be a bit careful. But yeah, so for 5 months I dual used, and that's the amazing thing about vaping is because there are so many variations. People can adapt different strength of juice, different flavours, different shapes of mods. It's all so variable, so it's individually people can create the environment for themselves that they need to give up smoking.
We'll come back to that about the devices and the market for the devices. I just still want to hear the personal stories. Ms. Darvill?
Sure. I smoked daily full-time from the age of about 15, but prior to that, probably from the age of 10, was dabbling in it. My mother was a smoker. My best friend was my cousin, and her parents were smokers. I remember, getting her father's rolling papers and stealing a small bag of tea out of the tea pot and taking them down to the school on the weekends and trying to roll them up with the pine leaves at the time. So obviously I was pretty dedicated way back then. From when I was 15, my first job, we were still able to smoke in our workplaces. And although this may go against the grain of some people that are pro-smoking or pro-choice, to a certain degree I think it did allow people like me to become much more addicted smokers because they had no restrictions whatsoever. So I was the receptionist, would have my cigarettes on my reception desk and be puffing away. The laws started to change when I got to about 23, and I'd made a couple of attempts at giving up smoking before that, but no real serious attempts. And by that stage, I was probably smoking about 20 a day, 25 a day. When I went to change jobs at 23, there were no smoking laws in offices, so I thought this is a good time to change careers. So I decided to become a sales rep. That way I could continue to smoke all day, every day. Then over the years after that, I had kids when I was about 28, so and married a non-smoker when I was 27, but was with him from about 23. Tried endless, I tried acupuncture, I tried stop smoking in 1 hour, money back guarantee. The thing was I never went back for the money back guarantee, so they've got me down as one of their successes. Quit line, I got the quit packs, I'd had the phone counselling, in later years the SMS service. I did Champix. I had a feeling after about 8 days on Champix that I was going to die if I continued to take it, and die if I stopped it. And I hate going to doctors, and I hate, I'm not a doctor's person, but I actually found myself ringing the after hours service at 9 o'clock one night saying, I'm going to die from this. What can I do? I tried Zyban. I got pregnant with twins when I was 28. And I loved or needed smoking so much that I continued to smoke, not heavily, not as heavily, but to my guilt, I continued to smoke. As soon as they were born, I was back up to a pack a day. Then I started smoking more because I then became a single mum. I was poor and I had no company. You can't leave the house when you've got 2 small children, so the best thing to do is go out the backyard, sit there and smoke. So I found myself getting to the stage where I smoked a minimum of 30 a day, up to 45 a day, couldn't afford it, would make choices that were detrimental to my children. I don't mean I did anything terrible to them. I still fed them and put a roof over their head. But if I had a choice of buying watermelon at $2 a kilo or apples at $1, if they wanted the watermelon, they weren't going to get it. I would make buying decisions based on whether I needed a packet of smokes or not. Quitting cold turkey, I tried that several times, probably nearly every Sunday night. I'd say, right, that's it, I'm not going to smoke again tomorrow. Then the only quit attempt I ever had that was more than a week that worked was through the Alan Carr method. Again, another money back guarantee if you don't quit. But I never went back again because I felt like a failure, because every time I tried to quit and I couldn't, or I'd relapse, I was a failure. I'd become very sick. I was coughing day and night. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd be coughing so much I'd vomit. And I started to work out how old my kids would be. And if I lived to 55, that means they were going to be 24. If I lived to 60, that means they're going to be 29. So I might actually end up seeing grandchildren. This is how I felt. Anyway, then I watched a program called The Project. So I'd given up giving up, and I decided I was just going to die early. And this is before I was 50. I watched a program on The Project, and it wasn't particularly a fantastic program, but there were a couple of ex-smokers on there that said that they got off cigarettes with vaping, and it was so good, it was so easy. But then I tried to find them. How do I buy them? And no one would tell me. I'd search online. I'd never bought anything online before. And so I went to The Project's Facebook page, and there were people talking about the show on there. And I said, how do I buy this nicotine? How do I buy this nicotine? And I was private messaged by a vendor that was in Queensland that said, we'll sell it to you. And they were a lovely couple, but they were selling black market under the counter. And so I didn't have a credit card to buy online, but they allowed me to pay it into their bank account. So I paid $110 and I got 2 devices and 2 power packs. I got a sample box of 20 e-liquids. It arrived in the post, and within my first 3 puffs, I thought, I think this is going to work. And within 3 days, I'd given up smoking, and that's more than 2.5 years ago now, and I haven't had one since.
So you gave us a bit of an idea. You were smoking quite a lot before you gave up, but so tell me your story.
Yeah, look, I, going through medical school and becoming a doctor, I was obviously aware of the health consequences of smoking, but like I said, I just got something from it that I didn't get anywhere else, and I tried to reduce my risk by not smoking too much. I would give up for periods of time, but then I'd be lured back to it, and I honestly felt better when I was a smoker than not a smoker in myself, and so I was trying to do everything else I could, exercise, eat well, to reduce my harm, and when my sister told me about the electronic cigarettes, I thought it was worth a go, and I got some from a shop in Melbourne, and got my e-liquid online, and started using it just as an experiment to see what would happen, and without too many big expectations of it. And neither did I have a desperate need to quit. I had a bit of a smoker's cough, and I was getting a bit puffed out, but it wasn't like some of the other people. And interestingly, I immediately reduced most of my smoking to about 2 or 3 a day. I still felt I needed those for quite a while, and I actually dual used for about a year. And part of it was a self-experiment. I wanted to see what sort of combination of e-liquids or other things would you need to swap entirely without wanting to. There are certainly a lot of accidental quitters, people who just start trying e-cigarettes and then decide, hey, this is better, I don't want to smoke anymore. For me, it wasn't quite there, and so I did some research and found out about other components in tobacco, and I obtained some Swedish snus and also some nasal snuff. And together with those things, once I started that, I was able to give up without any effort whatsoever. And that to me is the holy grail of smoking cessation. If you can find a combination of device, liquid, anything which is significantly harm reduced. So we're talking about, 95% or better harm reduction. And if we can get this out to the whole population, then we could make smoking obsolete. And that's what really excites me, is the idea that 1 billion people could die in this century from smoking-related diseases. And if we can actually find a way to innovate our way out of this tragedy, this disaster, by allowing companies to innovate, allowing consumers to try different things and tell each other about it through social media, then we could actually save that many lives, potentially.
Good. I'm going to come back to Dr. Wodak on a different issue. So I don't think you're an ex-smoker, are you?
No.
Oh, okay. So, Ms. Stone, could you tell us your story, please?
Yes, I smoked for 30 years. I started when I was 16 or 17 in my last year or two of high school. Prior to starting smoking, I was very against it because I knew it was increasing the risk of lung cancer and that it was a bad idea in terms of your health. And I also knew that they were very addictive. Both my parents smoked and most of the adults I knew smoked. So I used to tell them that they were stupid. And then I don't know what happened, something changed. I just thought, well, everybody says don't do it, and so I'm just going to do it. It was just a little rebellion of mine. I wasn't particularly a rebellious teenager. I also thought that I was immune to the risk, that I had plenty of time before I was, there would be any negative health impacts, and that I would just stop. And I just gradually, over the years, started to smoke a bit more and a bit more until I realised in my mid-20s that I was quite addicted and that it would be hard to stop. I made a couple of not serious quit attempts in my 20s and 30s, just cold turkey attempts, which didn't last more than a day or two. Then when I was in my 40s, I tried hypnosis, which didn't work at all, but cost me a lot of money. So I just was basically a cold turkey quit attempt. That was extremely difficult, and I had a period of about a month where I felt really quite depressed. I put on, I think, about 12 kilos, which made me feel more depressed, and I didn't feel very well. But then I went on a diet and started to lose that weight, and I felt better. But after about 6 months, I just got tired of wanting a cigarette. It never went away after 6 months. It got a little bit better after the first month or two, but it just kept coming up, and sometimes incredibly strong need to have a cigarette. And I think that those urges just wore me down, and after about 6 months there was a minor crisis in my life, and I just went straight out and bought another packet of tobacco and started smoking again. The second attempt was a few years later. I went to my doctor and got prescribed Champix. That was quite effective. I took it for, I think, about three months or 2.5 months. I stopped taking the medication early because I felt strange on that drug. I didn't feel like myself, and it just began to disturb me. So I stopped taking the drug and started smoking about a week later. After that, I thought a lot about smoking. I don't drink a lot. I don't really have any other vices. I try to eat well, although I don't always. And so I just weighed up the pros and cons, as I said earlier, and decided that I was just going to smoke because I enjoyed it. And if I died early from smoking, then so be it. A friend came around that I hadn't seen for a while. She was using the electronic cigarette. She hadn't smoked for a year, and I knew that she was dedicated smoker prior to that. So I was curious. I didn't think that it would make me quit smoking, and I had no urge to quit smoking at that stage, but I bought one out of curiosity, and from when I first started using it, pretty much, I didn't need to smoke. I'd continued to smoke 1 or 2 a day for a few weeks, and then I just thought, why am I bothering to do that? And so now I vape pretty much full-time, although I do still have a cigarette every now and then when I'm in the company of other smokers and having a drink. So that was 3 years ago. And I've been vaping instead of smoking.
So do you still have an occasional smoke?
Yeah, I do.
Do you think if you stop vaping, that would increase?
I think yes, definitely. Yeah.
And is there any reason why you think continue to having a smoke is the vaping? I think Ms. Wolters or Ms. Darvill suggested tweaking the dose. Do you think tweaking the dose would get you off those smokes?
No, because I think if I didn't, it would be easy to not have those smokes. I just have them because I don't feel, because of the environment. So I'm with friends that smoke, okay. and they're lifelong friends. So there's a long history of having a glass of wine with my girlfriends, the 2 friends who smoke. So it's just when I'm with them, it's more for sort of nostalgic reasons. And because I don't feel afraid of being addicted to smoking anymore, I know that I prefer vaping. There's just no chance. As long as I can vape, there's no fear that I would ever go back to smoking. So I just have one.
All right.
Because I'm not into that absolutist. I'm never going to have another cigarette again. I don't see any reason for that. I think having 2 cigarettes a month is not going to impact on my health or life in any way.
All right. Thank you. Now, Dr. Wodak, you have draw a distinction between tobacco harm reduction and tobacco control. Would you like to discuss that for the committee, please?
Well, in the middle of last century, evidence started accumulating in Britain from Richard Doll and others about the devastating health impacts of smoking. which were at the time not known. This is soon after World War II in Britain. And then the evidence accumulated over the next couple of decades, and a David and Goliath struggle developed between public health tobacco control people and the tobacco industry, which was extraordinarily powerful and influential. And bit by bit, David started to overcome the corporate Goliath, and the result has been that hundreds of lives have been saved around the world. Tobacco smoking prevalence dropped dramatically in this country and other rich countries, although unfortunately continued to rise in poorer countries. I strongly supported the kind of measures that people I regard as heroes were capable of somehow getting through the system. But another dimension was going on in this debate, and that was the issue of tobacco harm reduction. Michael Russell, who was a psychiatrist in Britain who did a lot of the research showing how central nicotine was to the continuation of smoking, coined a phrase which has been often quoted around the world, that people smoke for nicotine but die from tobacco. And that's really central to the thought of harm reduction. I've worked a lot in harm reduction for illicit drugs, but harm reduction is all pervasive in public health and indeed in public policy. It's a form of mitigating risks, and those of us who came here by car today and put on safety belts for practicing harm reduction. It's harm reductions everywhere. When you go to a children's playground and you see the kids playing on swings, and underneath them is a foam mattress on the ground rather than concrete, that's harm reduction. And a battle really unfortunately began after the development of e-cigarettes early last decade in China by a pharmacist who had lost his father from smoking and sat around and developed the first generation of e-cigarettes. After that developed, unfortunately, the public health movement split into those of us who strongly support harm reduction and others who strongly support tobacco control. And for those of us from harm reduction, the central objective is decreasing harm. That is deaths, disease, crime, corruption, violence, so on. And in this case, also the huge economic cost of smoking. And if people can find some way of still ingesting nicotine, which is much less harmful than tobacco, so be it. And that's what we advocate in terms of methadone instead of heroin, street heroin use, sterile needles and syringes instead of reusing dirty needles and syringes in the street, thereby controlling HIV. So there's a consistent thread in all of this. And that battle still goes on. And for me, the central issue is whether e-cigarettes are less harmful than tobacco. If, as well as that, e-cigarettes help people to quit smoking, and that debate still goes on, I think the evidence is increasingly favours the idea that e-cigarettes do help people to quit. We've heard that this morning. But even if they don't help people to quit, but all they do is reduce the lung cancer and the heart disease and the strokes and the gangrene, well, I think that's very positive. And I think the regulation of e-cigarettes in Australia is far too oppressive, far too negative, and as Attila has just said, the unintended consequence of the heavy-handed regulation of e-cigarettes in Australia is to favour tobacco, which is crazy. So I take this debate as, like many other debates in the harm reduction debates that have been raging and still rage today, and we're hearing about pill testing that I'm involved in. And these debates seem as though they're different, but in reality they're all the same. They're about whether we have a jihad about a particular drug, or whether we look for pragmatic, effective ways that respect human rights, but nevertheless focus on trying to reduce harm.
Okay, makes sense. So there are the other side of the argument, the tobacco control people plus the public health lobby don't like e-cigarettes.
No, they don't.
What are their arguments, and what do you think of their arguments?
Well, they're not really arguments. They're suppositions and concerns. So this is one of the concerns is e-cigarettes will normalise smoking. And they've been desperately searching around for evidence for this, but I think as time goes by, it's becoming clearer and clearer that they haven't really got evidence for this. What
do they mean by normalised smoking?
That people will, after decades of demonising and stigmatising smoking of cigarettes, that e-cigarettes will somehow change the public image and change the public policy, that policy will become tolerant and then encourage smoking. That's the sort of thing they're talking about. But this kind of debate is very common in all the other harm reduction debates on illicit drugs, for example, that you'll see in the current debate about pill testing, that one of the concerns of opponents of pill testing at raves is that this would normalise such drug use. And the same was said about needle syringe programs. The same was said about every harm reduction debate. And the same was said, for that matter, about car safety belts. When car safety belts were introduced in Australia in the late 1960s, there were critics of car safety belts, and their argument was that car safety belts, because we try and keep our risk levels at an equilibrium, if a risk behaviour is made safer, then that unwanted risk behaviour will become more reckless and more prevalent. That's the argument. It's based on what's something called in psychology the risk compensation hypothesis. Now, in the case of car safety belts, it became very clear that even though there might be the occasional motorist who drove a little bit faster or a little bit more recklessly, the net effect of introducing car safety belts was hugely positive. A huge reduction in deaths and serious injury. And likewise, in all the other harm reduction debates, we find the same kind of battle between fear and evidence. The needle syringe program debate had a lot of that element to it. So there are other fears they have. They argue. Danko might. Dr. Danko might take over. He's more familiar with all these debates.
The first thing I wanted to say about other people in public health is that it is not a. There are many people in tobacco control and tobacco issues in public health who are for e-cigarettes, and particularly in the UK, where they have the greatest experience of a society where they are awash in e-cigarettes. And as the use of them has increased, the public health organisations there have all come out pretty much all in favour of them, and they are pushing the agenda more and more, that even to the point where even the Prime Minister made a statement about how we should encourage smokers who can't quit any other way to have e-cigarettes. Their quit smoking services are moving to be e-cigarette friendly. They're supporting it as a positive health initiative. There would be no one in the UK who would, even the opponents of e-cigarettes in the UK wouldn't ever go as far as to calling for their banning to the level that we have here. So in Australia, we have to realise that tobacco control establishment is quite an insular group that generally has this idea that e-cigarettes are a plot from big tobacco to hook children and then to provide a gateway for smoking. And they keep repeating that line in spite of the evidence. They refuse to debate this issue openly with us. They enjoy having media time when they are allowed to speak without any answer, without any question. And there's certainly a bit of a support within politics and the ABC for continuing this this stance.
Well, yeah, go on.
Yeah, so they tend to roll out the same people again and again and don't actually allow them to engage in open debate.
All right, now this is interesting because it leads into a comment in one of your submissions in relation to the state of the art of the e-cigarettes, the devices themselves, and the comment that big tobacco is stuck playing catch up, that this is an innovative area, and as I'm sure you're well aware, our Prime Minister thinks innovation is a favourite topic at the moment. So can you tell me the state of you've got lots of devices sitting there. What does that reflect? What's the industry like?
Well, the industry is made of many small groups, many small businesses that are competing with each other to make more and more effective and satisfying substitutes for smoking. And they're coming out with new things often every few weeks. Not only are they increasing the effectiveness of them, they're also increasing the safety of them because of consumer demands. There are innovations such as temperature control that avoid overheating the e-liquid.
Why is that important?
That's important because there was a study that the people against these desperately hold on to, that e-cigarettes produce formaldehyde. This study has been debunked quite a few times, but it is still often brought out as an argument against them that e-cigarettes can contain formaldehyde 5 to 15 times greater than a cigarette. The truth is that immediately that study came out, vapers tested their own equipment at the same voltages under the same test conditions that the researchers did, and found that those settings were absolutely unvapable, that they involved temperatures much higher with much less fluid on the wick than anyone would ever tolerate, even for an instant. Temperature control means that the temperature is automatically limited so that those conditions never arise, no matter how the device is used or misused, no matter how little liquid is on the wick. It simply won't fire to produce that formaldehyde.
So just coming back to this issue of the market and where is the impetus coming from for this innovation and so forth. Look forward to the UK, where what you've described is a much more deregulated market than Australia by a long shot. Where do you think it's likely to develop over the next decade or two?
Well, I think it will continue to develop in much the same way, that we'll get increased effectiveness and increased safety. The consumers who have come off smoking, they demand increased safety. They want more studies, but studies which are done without bias, actually looking at e-cigarettes as an opportunity rather than a threat, looking for ways not to base an argument for banning them, but looking for ways to make them safer. So I think that this will continue. It's very hard to predict where it will end. When digital photography came out, Kodak still thought that they were going to be a player, and they rapidly found out that they weren't.
So what are the possibilities that the market will be, like many markets are, see the emergence of a relatively small number of major players who dominate, such as we see with mobile phones, such as we've seen with televisions and lots of other things as well. Do you think that's likely to occur with these?
Look, it's possible, but let's say I wanted to start a vape shop now. with $1,000, I could easily order online and get myself set up. If I was trying to start a tobacco company, I would require probably $100 million or more, and it would probably never happen. Mm-hmm. So the barriers to entry are really very small. The devices are actually, the essence of the device is actually simpler than a light bulb. It's just a heated wire, and you don't even have to worry about a vacuum like Edison struggled with. But at the same time, there's a huge amount of variables that can be changed. And one of the interesting things about this phenomenon is that consumers have been the ones at the forefront of developing new methods of using these. They, and often smaller companies then follow. So people found that using cotton instead of silica in the wick gave a better experience and a safer one as well. And then a couple of years after consumers had developed this on their rebuildable devices, then companies came out with pre-made coils with cotton in them. Again, with different types of coils, tinkerers at home would try different ways of coiling the devices and talk about it on social media. And then as some of them became popular, then small companies followed suit again. So this is very much a consumer-led revolution of people taking recreational nicotine into their own hands. And the smaller companies follow that.
Do you ever see a time when any of the tobacco companies, BAT, Imperial Tobacco, Philip Morris, have a major presence in this area?
Look, it's not impossible. There are certain advantages that they have in terms of distribution networks and resources to do new developments that the consumers themselves can't do. I don't have any opposition to if a tobacco company changes to just selling reduced risk products, then they no longer become a tobacco company and they should no longer be pariahs. At the moment, though, they're becoming further and further behind because the cost structure and the model, the business model that they have is very difficult to keep up with the rapid pace of innovation of the smaller companies and the consumers.
I imagine that the anti-tobacco lobby that you're referring to, Tobacco Control Group, would argue that if the tobacco companies sold e-cigarettes, that they would use them as a device for enlisting customers one way or another on tobacco, or whichever was most profitable of the two.
Yes.
So
that's their
how
argument.
How would you address that argument?
It was very interesting that when e-cigarettes came out, they were invented by not by tobacco companies. But as soon as the tobacco companies entered the market and produced their own little cigar-likes, that they immediately created massive advertisements which harked back to the old days of tobacco companies. And the interesting thing is that are they trying to eke out a market within this, or are they actually trying to convince tobacco controllers to react against them by creating all these flashy ads to try and actually get tobacco control to do their dirty work for them in suppressing the e-cigarette market? I don't know the answer to that.
All right, yes.
There are some companies mainly in China, Chinese companies that are emerging that are probably going to be leaders within the industry, possibly fairly exclusively internationally, unless regulation's done carefully. And if vaping is over-regulated, it's almost certain that, in fact, the tobacco companies and the pharmaceutical companies are going to be the only ones that have the funds to actually jump through regulatory hurdles. Mm-hmm. And if tobacco companies and pharmaceutical companies are in that position, they're also in a position to control things like what goes into what liquids go in, the size, price, and it will actually make it far less attractive to switch to vaping from smoking. So basically the status quo is maintained, and probably a lot of people would be happy with that.
May I add one thing? In South Australia, they've just had a regulatory process, and they've put out some recommendations that are currently going back to Parliament. And one of the recommendations is that a vape shop must be licensed. Now that sounds okay, doesn't it? You know, you need a licence to be a vape shop. But the other thing they've done is they've actually said that anyone that sells e-cigarettes cannot have a tobacco licence. Now, I'm undecided as to whether that's good or bad. In one way, it's bad because it means that someone that normally smokes goes into a smoke shop, doesn't get the opportunity to buy a vapor device, and maybe never sees or has the opportunity. On the other side of the coin, it says that if it means that if you are buying vape equipment, you're not going to go into a tobacco shop to buy some, and therefore be tempted back to smoking. So governments do see in their wisdom, one way or the other. Which one is right is, who knows?
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually, Mr. Darvill. Can I ask you now a little bit about using vaping e-cigs in smoking, non-smoking areas? So where can you do it and where can't you do it? As I understand it, New South Wales recently passed regulations that said wherever you not allowed to smoke, you're also not allowed to use an e-cigarette. Is that right?
No.
It's not right?
No. That's the case in Queensland.
Queensland, is it? All right.
In New South Wales, they haven't touched that yet. Right. They've restricted the sale, etc., but you can still, there are no rules at this stage.
On where you can use an e-cigarette?
On where you can use an e-cigarette.
So what do you think about that? I'm asking anybody in the group. What do you think about the fact that people have become, I suppose, accustomed to the idea that the smoking is not done, indoors at all, and that if somebody is puffing on an e-cig and there's a bit of vapour coming out, that's also not to be permitted? How do you respond to that?
It means that people who have actually given up smoking are now being, where these regulations come into place, people who've given up smoking now have to go out with the smokers. And we've been told over and over and over again that passive smoking is really bad for you. Why would you send someone who's given up smoking to go and breathe the smoke of all the smokers? It just doesn't make sense. I will vape anywhere. That's because I will stealth vape. And stealthing is when you hold the vapour for 20 seconds or so inside your lung and you breathe out invisible air. So it's completely unenforceable anyway, and those of us who are experienced, we just get around it all. I've vaped in hospital and on aeroplanes because it's just so ridiculous. And it's an insult, we're bullied and bullied and bullied to stop smoking. And when we do it the wrong way, we're sent out with the smokers again, like the troglodytes out into the darkness. So it's completely counterproductive.
Dr. Wodak,
the laws on smoking indoors and restricting smoking in places where there's lots of people or children is based on evidence that passive smoking is dangerous to bystanders, but there is no evidence for that with vapour. It's not toxic to bystanders. So it's an ideological basis to restricting vaping to areas where people smoke. There's no actual evidential reason to do that.
Thank you. Dr. Wodak.
Thank you. Look, a very good place to look for this battle between tobacco prohibition and tobacco harm reduction is in our prisons in Australia. Unfortunately, state and territory by state and territory, tobacco prohibitions coming into our prison systems with very little debate or discussion in the community. Now, there are very sensible reasons why you'd want to see lower smoking rates among Australian prisoners. It's a serious health hazard, very high smoking rates, very high rates of mental illness. It contributes to their poverty in prison because they earn very low rates of pay while they're in prison for doing some work, and they end up using a lot of that money to pay for their tobacco rather than paying for nutritious foods. The prison diet's pretty terrible. And also, it's in everybody's interests if they have savings at the end of their period of imprisonment when they go back into the community, so they can pay their first bond for somewhere to live, rather than having to steal to pay for somewhere to live. So, and not many people realise this, but also the risks of relapse to other forms of drug use, such as heroin, amphetamines, is much higher if they're smoking than if they've become non-smokers. So it's the grounds for trying to reduce smoking in prison are overwhelming. On the other hand, when this has been tested in courts, very often the courts have found that a prison is somebody's home while they're in prison. That's where they're living. And for the state to actually say to somebody that they're not allowed to smoke while they're in their own home is quite a philosophical leap, in my view. And as I say, the courts have found that. Not always, but very often have found that as well.
Prisoners don't take to it either kindly either, as far as I've read.
We have no evidence that smoking is for the tobacco prohibition is for the long-term benefit of prison inmates. That's to say, there are no follow-up studies that show that people who passed through prison where there was tobacco prohibition benefited in the long term. Okay. They relapse as soon as they leave the prison. And are there other problems associated with tobacco prohibition in prison? Well, yes, there are. There are stories, we can't document these, of prisoners rioting, prisoners setting fire to prisons, and we've had this in Australia as well as overseas. There are difficult to document because of the secretive nature of prisons, but there is a lot of evidence of different quality, admittedly, that when tobacco is banned in prisons, that other currencies re-emerge, expanded. And the other currencies, there are two other currencies in prison. One is sex and the other is illicit drugs. And there are many case reports of prison systems that have banned tobacco only to find that their heroin problems in prison got much worse. So there are many reasons to be concerned about this and many reasons to consider other ways of dealing with this problem. And there's another dimension to this, which is the prison authorities are increasingly aware of the occupational health and safety risks of allowing their prison warders to be exposed to smoke from prisoners. So how else could we manage this problem? Well, one way we could manage this problem, and I've done a lot of research about tobacco smoking cessation in prison, so it's a familiar problem for me. But one way of dealing with this problem would be to segregate prisoners who smoke from prisoners who don't smoke, and prison employees who smoke from prison employees who don't smoke. And according to senior people I know who work in the correctional system, that's not all that hard to do. So we could segregate the two groups, staff and inmates, and we could also provide to those prisoners who wanted to keep on taking in nicotine but didn't want to smoke, we could provide e-cigarettes. And there are e-cigarettes that have been deliberately designed to be used in prisons because there are risks of e-cigarettes in prisons as well, but they can be revised.
These are them.
And Donna's, thank you, Donna, and Donna's got examples of those and could tell you about the technical modifications that make these suitable for the prison environment. And I don't see why we haven't had this debate in Australia.
Thank you. We're running into time, but there's one other area that I want to touch on before we knock off this session, and that is the importance of cost of tobacco relative to e-cigs, and also, options for cost reduction in sticking with tobacco as well. How important do you think that is? Was it to you, those of you who smoked and then moved to e-cigs? How much was cost a factor? How much do you think it is generally?
For me, it wasn't a major cost factor. It was sort of staying alive that was my major motivation. But what has amazed me since I stopped smoking is the fact that I have money to spend on luxuries like books and some fairly decent clothing instead of the cheaper stuff I can buy. So it's...
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cost wasn't a big factor for me because I was smoking rolling tobacco, and that was 3 years ago. So back then it wasn't costing me any more than $40 a week. It's a lot more now. But I think cost is a huge factor for people who are disadvantaged.
Thank you.
For me, cost wasn't a factor in converting from smoking to vaping. That was for health reasons, and I just wanted to quit. To save money on smoking, I just use black market tobacco. That's the way to save money for people who want to smoke but don't want to pay the tax. And that market is just getting bigger and bigger. It's just everywhere, chop chop. So it was just for health reasons that I converted to vaping.
Thank you.
For me personally, it wasn't a cost issue, but it is actually one of the tactics that we can use to help other smokers to quit smoking, and that is to initially tell them, look, give it a try. It's going to cost you a lot less. You're spending a lot of money on smokes at the moment. So what we've got with vapors is actually a whole team of people who can help other people to quit smoking. It's a social viral phenomenon of people helping each other to quit smoking. It should be seen as a public health bonanza, an opportunity.
For me, it was 50-50 cost and health. When I say health, also mental health. I couldn't afford to smoke, but I smoked more and more every single day, every single week, because I was so stressed about the cost and the health. I'm appalled, absolutely appalled, that one of the parties in the next election are proposing to put up the price of smoke for smokers by another 12.5% per year. Even though I'd love the opportunity to convert every single one of those, I think it's the most regressive thing that I've ever heard of. I think it's appalling, and it's only going to hurt the kids, the homeless, the sick, the pensioners. The people that can afford to smoke already don't. It's the people that can't afford to smoke that still smoke. So that's my view.
That's a good note to end on. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attendance today. I really appreciate it, and for those of you on the phone as well. We'll adjourn now for about 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
To have evidence heard in camera, or it may determine that certain evidence should be heard in camera. All right, so now I invite each of you to make a brief opening statement should you wish to do so, and then the committee will ask questions. We'll start with Professor Stimson, then Mr. Bates and Mr. Barnes.
Right, thank you. I'm a public health social scientist and spent most of my academic career doing research on drug problems. From 1986 onwards, I helped to invent, to disseminate, to develop and to evaluate harm reduction for people who inject drugs as a way of preventing the spread of HIV infection. And drugs harm reduction was an outstanding public health success. I don't smoke, I don't vape, and the only drug I use is alcohol. But I have very strong personal views in favour of both drugs and tobacco harm reduction. They both share a similar objective to reduce health risks for people who are unwilling or unable to stop using their drug of choice. Smoking tobacco is the most harmful way of delivering nicotine. In excess of 4,000 chemicals are released, a number of which are carcinogenic, along with carbon monoxide. The tobacco harm reduction proposition is straightforward. Most smokers risk disease and premature death. Most smokers say they want to stop smoking, and many have tried. Many find it hard to stop, and many are unable or unwilling to give up nicotine. Providing safer ways of delivering nicotine via e-cigarettes and other alternative nicotine delivery systems enables people to continue using nicotine, but to avoid the health risks of smoking. In terms of the UK experience, e-cigarettes came onto the market around 2007. There's a wide range of products and a remarkable rapid uptake of e-cigarettes. The latest data from the Office for National Statistics indicates 2.2 million people currently using them. That's 4% of the adult population, and that compares with the around 18 or 19% of the population who smoke cigarettes. So e-cigarettes have now become the most common device used by smokers in the UK to help them quit smoking. It's unlikely that any formal public health initiative could claim so much impact in such a short time. This has, in effect, been a consumer and market solution to a public health problem. And I contend that e-cigarette makers, vaping stores, vaping forums and vapers are now really the new leaders in smoking cessation. Australia led the world in drugs harm reduction to help prevent the spread of HIV, but regarding e-cigarettes, it's got an illiberal policy that denies smokers better and safer alternative nicotine delivery systems. The solution, I believe, is fairly straightforward. Nicotine is a Schedule 7 dangerous poison. This effectively prohibits legal access to nicotine. Nicotine needs to be reclassified to make it available for purchase as a consumer product. This change needs to be supplemented by consumer standards for e-cigarettes and e-liquids. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Mr. Barnes. Oh, yeah, we'll go to Mr. Bates, yes.
Okay, my name is Clive Bates. I became interested in the concept of tobacco harm reduction really from 1998 onwards, when I was the Director of Action on Smoking and Health, the main anti-smoking charity in the UK, and I've been committed quite passionately to it ever since then. That's my main conflict of interest. I have no other financial or otherwise conflicts of interest when I'm speaking to you today. I just want to make 4 points or 4 propositions for the committee to consider. The first is that it is absurd to have a ban, de jure or de facto, on these products. The arguments around them are often couched in a lot of sophistry, but basically there are no precedents and no ethical basis for banning a much safer variant of a product that's very dangerous and widely available on the market. There are no precedents for that. It is frankly absurd. Second proposition is that the regulatory justifications for doing this, which is to classify the products as either medicines or poisons, are without foundation. These products are widely used in Europe and the United States with minimal problems, nothing that isn't manageable, and they are most definitely not medicines. They're not used for the prevention or treatment of disease. They're used as alternatives that are much safer, the alternatives to smoking that are much safer. Third proposition is a sort of market-based one. It is ridiculous and completely inappropriate to create a regulatory protection for the cigarette trade by banning a new technology competitor. There is no justification for protecting the incumbent, highly harmful product from an insurgent, uprising new technology with superior characteristics and much less harm to the user. And then finally, my fourth point is that these products point the way to the future of ending the enormous burden of death and disease from smoking. 1 billion people expected to die in the 21st century on current trends worldwide. the normal way in which defective technologies or inadequate or poor technologies fade away is through the process of creative destruction, through superior technology coming on the market, through innovators coming up with something better that meets the needs of what people actually want to do, but without killing them or harming them. There's no reason why those processes shouldn't work to get rid of cigarettes and all the cancer, cardiovascular and respiratory disease that goes along with it.
Thank you. Mr. Barnes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I prepared a written statement with the committee's indulgence. I'd certainly like to table for the record, which also may save some time, I think, in terms of exposition. I concur with what Professor Stimson and I concur with what Professor Stimson and Mr. Bates have just said. I think effectively we are dealing with really an innovation that is potentially much lower risk than existing combustible tobacco and cigarettes. We are talking about a way of improving people's health and saving lives, yet in terms of the way that we approach regulation in public health space in Australia and in tobacco control in particular, our focus is more on prohibit or ban first then ask questions later, whereas in the UK they are taking the let's give e-cigarettes the benefit of the doubt, let the evidence continue to be gathered, but give people access to them. And when you have government agencies and the National Health Service prepared to back them and to recommend them for quit smoking programs, I think that's a complete antithesis to what's happening in Australia. So my sense is, from a policy analysis point of view, I'm not a scientist, I'm a policy person. It seems to me that in public health in general, in terms of promoting the cause of harm reduction, that we do not get proactive enough in embracing new innovation, new technology, new ideas, and that we shouldn't be afraid of these things. We should rather embrace them, because if we're talking about the balance of risk, I think the risk of smokers particularly continuing to expose themselves to killing risks through their continued smoking because they don't have easy access to alternatives is actually morally wrong, as well as wrong in a policy sense. The other thing I'd just briefly add is that a great anomaly in Australian regulation in this space is the Schedule 7 of the poisons standard, where the only legally available avenue for nicotine outside quit smoking aids is in, quote, tobacco prepared and packed for smoking, unquote. Now, if deadly cigarettes are readily available in the open market, why shouldn't a much less risk product or alternative to those cigarettes be available in the open market as well? I mean, that's, again, I think it's where overzealous regulation has got in the way of common sense.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps Mr. Barnes, are you familiar with the World Health Organization report of July 2014?
Yes, I'm aware, Senator.
And I note that that report observes that transnational tobacco companies have entered the market in this area, and in fact, each of those companies has a ENDS, as they call it, device on the market. Is that cause for concern, do you think? I know you touch on that and you say you are somewhat dismissive, I would say, about that.
This is probably not the right word, Senator, but I take your point. The way I see it, which I was trying to express in the submission, is that if big tobacco, if you want to call them that, wants to enter new markets that get them ultimately out of deadly tobacco, I don't have a problem with that. Basically, the free market can encourage change for the good. I don't see them as evil players in that sense, not at all. But effectively, I think we must continue to all agree that smoking is bad. It is dangerous. It is deadly. combustible tobacco cigarettes are therefore equally deadly and undesirable products in any market. And anything that reduces the rate of smoking is worth trying. Some interventions like tobacco excise are worse than others, but nonetheless, we are wanting to get people off smoking. We want to give them an alternative. What I'm arguing is basically it should be on the open market and not simply as a quit aid.
There are some health risks with nicotine. It's not a completely benign.
Nothing's risk-free.
Substance. Apart from its addictive component, there is the adverse effects during pregnancy. Might contribute to cardiovascular disease. And according to the WHO, it may function as a tumour promoter. So I take the point about the chemicals that are involved in burning nicotine, but it's not a particularly nice substance.
That's a fair point, Senator. But I think you've also got to keep this in perspective as well. I mean, if you have too much caffeine in your body, that can be no good for you. I mean, caffeine is an addictive substance. Some have argued that nicotine on its own in moderate quantities, like caffeine, is probably no more harm than caffeine. I think it was Shirley Kramer of the Royal Society for Public Health in the UK argued that last year. But anything used badly or excessively carries risks. Any product, any substance carries risks. It's a question of how great the risk in relation to the use is. And if we're talking about e-cigarettes containing nicotine, my sense, and I'm not the scientist in the way that Professor Stimson is, and maybe he can elaborate a bit further, but provided that the liquid is secure and safe and conforms to appropriate standards, it should be safe. I mean, but I'm not going to disagree that nicotine in itself is a harmful substance, but everything in moderation.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I also want to pursue this issue of the World Health Organisation. Perhaps Professor Stimson, you might be able to help with this. In your submission, you say the World Health Organisation estimates there will still be over 2 million tobacco smokers in Australia a decade from now.
Yes.
Now, what assumptions did the WHO make in relation to the rate of decline of smoking? Did they assume the steady state decline that's been occurring now for several decades?
Oh, the World Health Organization does projections for many countries based on the epidemiological data and extrapolate from those data to predict further rates of smoking. So yes, rates of smoking are declining in Australia. But the WHO estimation is that even in a decade from now, there will still be over 2 million tobacco smokers in Australia. And if we accept that notion, or even if we accept it might be lesser or greater, there will still be a substantial number of smokers who are at risk of ill health and early death through smoking. So that provides, I think, an imperative for making available a safer alternative for them.
Yes. Now, we've heard from other witnesses that use of e-cigarettes is rising quite fast in the UK. So,
correct.
Are there any estimates as to their the relative rates of smoking that might occur in the UK versus Australia under the two different regulatory approaches? So Australia has a very prohibitive regime for e-cigarettes. UK has a permissive regime. Is it possible to project what the smoking rates might be in the two countries?
Well, the adult prevalence of cigarette smoking in the UK is declining and has continued to decline in the period where e-cigarettes have become available. There are various estimates, but it's probably around about 18 to 19% of the adult population now. going back to around about 2007 when e-cigarettes were introduced. It would have been around 20, 21, 22%. So we're seeing a continued decline in cigarette smoking in the period in which e-cigarettes have been introduced. Now, it's very hard to make a causal link between the two, but certainly the Office of National Statistics' recent survey of e-cigarette use, as I said in my introduction, it indicates there are 2.2 million people currently using e-cigarettes, and of those, around 850,000 e-cigarette users are no longer smoking. And that is a huge number of smokers who have shifted from smoking to sole e-cigarette use. I mean, I think we've never really seen such switching from smoking with any so rapidly with any other intervention. So, yes, firstly, our trends in smoking are downwards, and secondly, there is good sort of prima facie evidence that e-cigarettes are contributing to that decline.
Mm. Now, also the suggestion has been made that the major tobacco companies would have a vested interest in the e-cigarette market not growing as fast as it might unless they were leaders in that field. And the previous witnesses suggested that they're not. What's your perception on that from a UK perspective?
In the UK, we have a sort of mixed market. Many of the original e-cigarettes were imported and distributed by small companies, some made in the UK. The trend in the last 2 to 3 years or so has been for major cigarette companies, tobacco companies, to move into the e-cigarette market, either buying up smaller companies or developing their own brands. And certainly, I mean, two major, British American Tobacco, for example, has invested substantial sums of money in scientific developments regarding sort of R&D for e-cigarettes. I think that is coming about initially as a defensive response to e-cigarettes, because tobacco volumes are continuing to decline, and tobacco companies, seeing that e-cigarettes are a competitor, want to take a share of that market. So most tobacco companies now, I think, are interested in developing their own e-cigarette brands. I have mixed feelings about that. Certainly they have the reach to, they can reach more people, they have better marketing clout and so on and so forth. On the downside, I suspect that there's a question about how rapidly they will innovate and develop new products, because this has been a fast-moving field for innovation, and whether the tobacco companies will be able to keep up with that or even start to lead that, I think is a good question. But as the previous witness, as Terry Barnes said, I don't see any problem in tobacco companies getting interested in selling alternative nicotine delivery systems. I think keep up the pressure on them to stop them selling tobacco cigarettes, and encourage them to transform their businesses more into nicotine companies. That would be, if you like, my vision for the next 10 to 20 years, seeing a transformation in these companies. They're not going to stop, but they won't stop overnight selling cigarettes, but they need to be given every incentive to move into safer nicotine products.
All right. What I want to pursue with each of you is this, that word you've just used, safer nicotine products. There is a perception that nicotine is nicotine and equally dangerous no matter how it's obtained, and that's actually prompting a regulatory environment here in Australia that tends to treat e-cigarettes as equivalent to cigarettes, ordinary cigarettes. What can you tell us, for the benefit of the committee and to read into Hansard as well, about the relative hazards of smoking versus use of e-cigarettes with nicotine. I don't mind. Anyone who wants to volunteer, perhaps Professor Stimson.
Shall I have a go?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Bates.
I think the important thing to understand is that the nicotine is the reason, one of the main reasons why people smoke in the first place. It's a mildly psychoactive drug. People like it. You could call it addictive or dependence-forming. But it is not the main source by far of the harm that's done to people that materialises in the form of cancer, cardiovascular disease, respiratory illness, stroke, and all the other things that do all the basically serious health damage and cause all the premature death. I mean, Sens, who spoke earlier, was right. There are some, it's not completely benign. It's not like tofu or something. It does have some health implications, but these are minor. The main role that nicotine plays in smoking and in e-cigarettes is this, providing the psychoactive drug that people like to use. The damage is done by the delivery system. In the case of cigarettes, this is particles and hot gas particles of sort of burning, smouldering tobacco, which have all the products of combustion that you get if you burn organic material, and the hot toxic gases that are also products of combustion. And it is the absorption of those into the lungs, into the body, ultimately that causes all the ill health. If you deliver the nicotine on a relatively benign substance like propylene glycol and a liquid aerosol of propylene glycol, then you have nothing like the same degree of concern. So although people will say we don't know what the long-term health implications of e-cigarettes versus smoking are, and that's a kind of truism, it's almost a banality to say that, we can't go forward 50 years into the future. But we do know a lot of important information about what is in e-liquid vapor and what is in cigarette smoke. And the difference between those two is that we know that most of the things that cause ill health that are present in cigarette smoke are either not present at all in e-cigarette vapor or are present at very, very much lower concentrations, like 2 to 3 orders of magnitude lower. So on the basis of that, the main government public health agency in England has concluded that it's fair to say that as a way of getting a handle on these relative risks, that e-cigarettes are going to be of the order of 95% less risky than smoking. Now, what they're not saying is that they are 5% as risky as smoking. They're saying that even taking account of unknowns, allowing for, health effects that we haven't anticipated, that's a fair estimate. At the moment, there is no evidence of any serious health concerns arising from e-cigarette use. So we're talking about something that is at least 95% less dangerous than smoking and probably closer to 100% less dangerous, although we can never be sure.
Okay, so is the perception that e-cigarettes are just as dangerous as smoking, is that common in the UK? My feeling is that it's relatively widespread here.
It is. It's more common than it ought to be, and actually it's one of the reasons why Public Health England put that number out. They were very concerned that people had misunderstandings about the relative risk, that we had survey data showing that there were substantial numbers of smokers who either didn't know or thought they were of equivalent risk. And therefore, given that reduced risk is one of the biggest selling points of these products, that is actually the important thing that smokers get from this, for them not to understand that more people would not be taking the decision to switch, and therefore more people would be continuing to smoke, and therefore more people would, ultimately get sick and die from it. So it's seen as it's that perception, the perception that they are of equivalent risk, is completely false, but it's quite widespread. It's quite widespread for a number of reasons. There's quite irresponsible commentary coming from a number of academics. There's a lot of media sensationalism about them. But the calmer, cooler heads in the expert community would, certainly in the UK anyway, have coalesced around this figure of 95% or less risky than smoking.
And well, has the NHS helped to correct that perception of the relative harm of e-cigarettes compared to smoking?
Actually, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. The NHS has taken that on and has included it in its advice. And in fact, just this last month, we've had some new guidance that has gone out to all the stop smoking services, which embraces this concept and makes this point about there being much lower risk, and essentially encourages the people who are professionally engaged in helping people quit. And these are people who are employed in the public sector. They're not, they're part of the NHS or local government, and has given them advice to use these figures and use these arguments and encourage people to try these products if they're struggling to quit smoking.
The people who don't like e-cigarettes sort of argue on the precautionary principle approach. We don't know enough about it. It's the same stuff as in cigarettes. Is there any reason, what do you think of that argument? Do you think it's...
I think
Go ahead.
Sorry, I think the precautionary principle here just simply doesn't work. When you apply the precautionary principle, you're supposed to look at both the consequences of action and inaction. So if you ban something that is much safer than the product that's the market norm, and you do that saying, well, we don't know how dangerous it is, we better ban it, the danger is that you just leave people to smoke. You don't actually, it's a kind of form of reckless precaution. You think you're being responsible and cautious, but by denying people an option to move to a product that's much lower risk, because you're not absolutely sure it's lower risk, or you're not paying attention to what we do know, you're concentrating on what we don't know, you might actually be putting people in greater danger. And the precautionary principle doesn't really fit at all well with that circumstance. It was originally developed for, kind of environmental decision-making, where you had an economic interest that would do some kind of irreversible damage to the environment. You can't easily port that into a public health situation where the consequences of your action there might be unintended consequences arising that lead to more harm, i.e. more smoking, because people don't have the option to switch.
All right. Now, Mr. Barnes and Mr. Bates might like to both contribute to this one, is what sort of regulatory regime or government policy towards e-cigarettes would you recommend? And that includes, say, their uses in workplaces and public venues.
I'll go first if that's okay.
Yes.
Yes.
I think we should be regulating on the benign side. I'm not a no regulation person. I'm a sensible regulation person. If we take it as given on the basis of the weight of evidence to date, I think, and using the Public Health England 95% more safe than smoking criterion, it seems to me that allowing people to vape as much as possible within the bounds of reason, and that includes community, social norms as much as any attempt to regulate, should be encouraged. It shouldn't be discouraged. My sense is that if we're talking about use in public places, common sense should be the guide. That in pubs and clubs, for instance, I think it should be at operator discretion, not mandated by law, taking into account the venue, the staff, the patrons, and so forth, and what their wishes are. As long as people are informed about the product, informed about the practice, know what it's all about, and know that what they're getting themselves in for. In terms of treating e-cigarettes as identical to tobacco cigarettes, given the balance of risk, almost certainly is much lower. It just seems to be counterintuitive in terms of the public policy aspects of this. It is encouraging people to think of them as bad. It's encouraging them to think that it's unwise to use them. And yet we still legally condone the use of combustible tobacco cigarettes with all the deadly cocktail of chemicals and gases that involves. So to draw that together, effectively make them available in the open market. Do not treat them as a boutique quit smoking aid product. Allow them to be used as widely as possible, including in public places. Allow community norms to govern some of that rather than hard regulation. But I think there should be some reciprocity as well from vapers if they have the opportunity and are given the opportunity to use or to vape in public, that they should be mindful of others, of passive users, people around them, and show the basic consideration that all of us should show each other in society. That's far better than hard regulation.
Mr. Bates?
Yeah. May I comment? Clive Bates. I think there's some definite things not to do with regulation. So don't do what's planned in the United States and regulate them as if they're tobacco products, using a framework that is designed to prevent innovation and essentially suppress the category completely. That is not helpful for e-cigarettes. We need innovation there. Don't use the approach that's been developed in the European Union, which is a set of arbitrary compromises that were agreed in haste after failing to agree to regulate the products as medicines. Don't regulate as medicines, which is the Australian and Canadian approach. The way to do it is to come up with a scheme of regulation that provides consumer confidence, gets rid of rogue products and cowboy operators, but it's not so aversive that it creates high regulatory barriers to entry that basically distort the industry and make more of the products and firms unviable until ultimately you have only the tobacco companies standing with the deep pockets able to clamber over the regulatory hurdles. And the way to do that, I suggest, is to have a series of standards that you set for product design, for liquid quality. You require pharmaceutical-grade substances, food-grade flavourings, that you concern yourself with electrical and heat thermal safety of the devices, that you have labelling that is meaningful to consumers and provides them with useful information, not necessarily just scare things, but advice on perhaps the relative risk of these products compared to smoking, which is actually useful consumer information. Things to do with what to do if something goes wrong, where to get help, things like that. That's the sort of, and then there's some protective things, like you would have, child-resistant caps on e-liquid bottles. You would try to, just make sure that the integrity of everything that was sold was high quality. If you do that, you're actually strengthening your market, you're building confidence, and you're making people who might be risk-averse about trying something that's an alternative to smoking, paradoxically, you might make them more confident to use these products and invest in them. At the same time, you're creating a stable framework for the companies to develop new products and to innovate without feeling that the regulatory system has been designed mainly to put them out of business.
Could I add? I reiterate much of what has been said. I would say, firstly, don't ban or don't pursue bans. Some countries are introducing bans, but to do that, then you lose all ability to control standards and guarantee consumer safety. Don't regulate as medicines. Very cumbersome, lengthy, costly, anti-innovative, And in fact, they're not being used as medicines, and one of their attractions is that they are not medicines. And you talk to vapers, and some of them say to you, well, for the first time, stopping smoking is kind of interesting. It's almost enjoyable. Well, it is enjoyable, whereas the medical approach to the treatment of cigarette smoking makes life a little bit of a misery. Don't regulate as tobacco products, and the tobacco control framework is completely wrong, because tobacco control seeks to limit and prohibit use, whereas in the case of e-cigarettes we need to encourage use by smokers. Most of, I think all of the issues that people might be concerned about concerning e-cigarettes can be picked off by good product standards, and there's already some experience of that in the UK. There's a British Standards Institute standard. From France, there's a French standard. Then there's the start of a process to develop a European standard for e-cigarettes, which will assure consumers of safety and quality. Things like advertising, there should be advertising. One of the problems in the UK, in the EU, under the Tobacco Products Directive, is a major ban on most forms of advertising. But if a product is safer than cigarettes, you need to tell people that it's available. So don't restrict advertising. Don't have unnecessary controls over vaping in public places. That's not a matter for the law. That's easily dealt with by managers of premises and by good etiquette, good behaviour on the part of e-cigarette users. So there are a number of standards and regulatory options which are light touch, don't do anything which is going to make it harder to obtain e-cigarettes than it is to obtain their major competitor, which is tobacco cigarettes.
Yeah.
If I could just add to my comments earlier, though it's good to know that I'm in furious agreement with my colleagues. The one area where I think there should be hard regulation, without question, is in relation to the sale and marketing of e-cigarettes to minors. I think we do have to treat these products as adult products and make sure that everything, advertising, marketing, point of sale and sale itself is focused on people over the age of 18.
Well, can I just explore that? I've got a couple of other issues that I'm going to raise as well, but just on that, I mean, the reality is that nearly every smoker starts smoking well under 18, so they get access to cigarettes, notwithstanding the fact that it's illegal to sell them to anyone under 18. So do we want 18-year-olds to, or under 18, 16, 15-year-olds to start smoking? Do we want them to quit as well?
Well, we don't want
why would we want... I mean, the idea of not having them start in the first place is not all that successful.
I take your point, Senator. I don't want... But firstly, I think we don't want kids to start smoking, full stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that.
But the second thing is, and I think I do take your point about how minors get access and start to experiment and, if you like, get recruited to the market. But what I'm saying is I do not think, as a point of policy, that any, if you like, direct recruiting should take place, that we should not be encouraging or condoning the marketing of these products, as with tobacco, to children. We actually want them to not get involved in the first place. Where these products are of most benefit are to established smokers who are looking for alternatives, and I think we need to make the starting assumption we're talking about adult smokers who are legally able to make those choices.
Well, this raises a question that I was getting to, that one of the arguments of those who don't like e-cigarettes is that it recruits people into smoking or consumption of nicotine and then ultimately into smoking who wouldn't otherwise do so. And the Public Health England, or whatever it's called, submission says we've received suggests that doesn't occur, virtually never. So what you're suggesting, I think, implies that that's a possibility.
Yes, I think it is. I mean,
how big a risk is it such a big risk that it warrants restricting advertising and marketing to under 18s who might already be smoking?
Well, that's a very good point, and maybe my scientific colleague, or Gerry Stimson, might be a good one to elaborate on it. But what I am arguing, I think, is that we cannot control everybody's behaviour, but we can direct elements of sales and marketing behaviour in an appropriate direction. What happens beyond that is a matter for individuals. You just can't control the supply chain, if you like, all the way down in this case.
Okay.
But I think there is a good public policy case to focus purely on the adult market in terms of that side of things.
Professor Stimson, I might bring you into this here, and also if you have any comments on this general issue of under 18s, but there's also a comment that I'm going to read out from the submission by the Royal Australian College of Physicians, who are relatively enthusiastic about restricting e-cigarettes, shall we say. And they are concerned that e-cigarettes are designed to replicate and reinforce hand-to-mouth smoking behaviour. And they also argue that e-cigarettes can appear novel, leading to the recruitment of users who would not otherwise pick up the habit. This has been observed in the US and Poland in relation to nicotine e-cigarettes, where uptake amongst adolescents who have never previously smoked has more than tripled between 2010-11 and 2013-14. Can you offer any comments on all of that?
There are a number of areas there, and I could comment on some of them, and I think Clive Bates may be able to comment on some of them as well. If I can point first to the UK, the main uptake of e-cigarettes has been by adults and amongst people who are already smokers. The uptake or the trying of e-cigarettes by young people is negligible. It's sort of less than 1%. So we're not seeing the uptake of e-cigarettes by young people in the UK. The Polish data I'm not so familiar with. The US data, certainly young people try things, and you have to look carefully when you're looking at the US data, working out what they are measuring. And the problem is that in many of the surveys, they have been counting as use, any use in the last 30 days or any use in the last year. So you're picking up a lot of triers, but certainly the level of trying e-cigarettes in the US has been rising. But also at the same time, there's been a dramatic reduction in the level of cigarette smoking amongst young people. So we've got to tease apart exactly what's going on there. To return to the earlier discussion between the senators, I think this is a bit of a quandary about what should be the policy on the age of sale, because it's quite clear that most people start smoking before the age of 18. Now, theoretically, if e-cigarettes provided some protection against smoking, I think we might be having a debate about their availability to the under 18s. But it's certainly a quandary. I mean, it's a quandary in other areas of public health. Sexual behaviour doesn't start at the age of majority, so what do you do about contraception below the age of majority? And I think we all know the answer to those sorts of questions. But we're kind of moving into new areas here for which we don't have clear answers. But at the end of the day, harm reduction doesn't begin at 18. So I share the doubts and share the complexity of the issues that are being raised, and I don't have a clear answer to that question about age limits. Just finally, certainly e-cigarette companies are not targeting young people. If they were, they've been remarkably unsuccessful because of the very low uptake. Sorry, I interrupted you.
That's good. Just a couple more questions because we're running close to the end of this slot. Mr. Bates, I wonder if you could describe for the committee an account of the Van Heerden case in Western Australia. You've outlined it in your submission, but perhaps if you give us further details.
I haven't studied the legal aspects in detail, but essentially he was arrested for selling e-cigarettes using a piece of law that was designed to stop people selling effectively toy cigarettes, candy cigarettes or toy cigarettes. So it was felt that those, that type of product was designed to coach young people in learning, in really young people, I'm talking about real children, in how to smoke. So there's a number of laws on the statute book, but they were never intended to prevent a vape shop selling e-cigarettes, which are not cigarettes but look like cigarettes, to adults, which is what they were doing, what he's been basically arrested for. He was found guilty and charged, and he's gone through a series of appeals. And actually, the final appeal, I think it's a Supreme Court appeal. We should hear the verdicts on Thursday this week, on the 10th. So yes, to me, it is absolutely ridiculous, abusive use of public health legislation. It was clearly never intended for that. It's been used opportunistically and in a bullying way by the authorities in Western Australia to have a go at him. And it's deplorable in my view. I hope he succeeds, and I hope they have to, pay his costs and some damages. They've nearly put him out. Well, I think they would have put him out of business if he hadn't had a lot of worldwide support for his case.
I think it's just worth noting too, Senator, that the Van Heerden case reflects the zealousness of the tobacco control bureaucracy in Western Australia. For whatever reason, the officials in that state seem to take their role in this area very seriously. I think that's reflected in government policy in Western Australia, regardless whether it's a Labor or a coalition government. It's interesting, actually. I think a week or so ago there was that same bureaucratic unit attempted to shut down a pub in Perth because it had antique tobacco posters on its walls, for players, Navy Cup, that sort of thing. But products that have been not on the market for 60 years or more, simply because it related to tobacco. Apparently, I think the Minister for Health in Western Australia actually put a lid on that. But nonetheless, this is the type of over-enthusiasm in compliance and enforcement that I think is intruding into the way that policy is being made about e-cigarettes in Australia.
All right. Now, finally, Mr. Barnes, the Intergovernmental Committee on Drugs Review of E-cigarettes is being conducted by the University of Sydney. Could you describe that for the committee, please? Well,
the Ministerial Standing Committee commissioned a policy review of in this space, which was contracted to the School of Public Health. I'd love to tell you more about it, Senator. I really would, but it's been out there. It's been happening in one way or another for the best part of a year now, and it still hasn't seen the light of day. I would think it is in the public interest, as well as in the interest of the governments that commissioned it, to actually have it out there for consultation, for debate and discussion, because I can't tell you what's in it. I haven't been consulted. Many people in the tobacco control space haven't been consulted, let alone consumers. So I think it's important. But just quickly, what has happened, though, while this process that is supposed to be a national process has been running, is that states such as Queensland and more recently New South Wales have gone ahead with their own regulatory decisions and implemented them. So if it's supposed to be informing legislation and regulation, it seems to be doing nothing of the sort.
Which minister was responsible for the review in the first place?
Well, it would have been Senator Nash as the Minister for Public Health. I understand she still has it as part of her new portfolio responsibilities.
Okay. Senator Ketter, do you have any more questions?
No, for the moment.
All right. I think we might leave it there. If you think we're missing any compelling points, Mr. Bates or Professor Stimson.
I've just got a couple of very quick ones for you. You mentioned Poland. The concern about Poland came from a very strange study, one very one-off study. The official data shows Polish smoking rates amongst young people falling at a faster rate than ever between 2013 and 2015. So we have a corrective to that. And one final thing is an American economist studied different states that had either banned or not banned e-cigarette sales to under 18s, and found that the states where e-cigarette sales to under 18s were not banned had a more rapid decline in smoking. Okay, and that's Abigail Friedman's paper, which you can look up on the internet, or I can send you. But it's an interesting continuation of the point I think that was being made earlier, is that one has to be careful about denying young people access to these when they might otherwise be smoking.
A more rapid decline of smoking amongst young people when e-cigarettes were not prohibited, were available to young people, is what you're saying.
That's what the findings were. That's what the findings were. Yeah, I can send over the summary of that study.
All right. Yes, if you will, just for the Hansard, so we can put it into evidence. What's the name of the author?
Right. The author is Abigail Friedman, or Friedman A.S., and the paper is "How Does Electronic Cigarette Access Affect Adolescent Smoking?" And the paper was published in the Journal of Health Economics in 2015.
Very good. Thank you very much. If you could just shoot it across to us, that would be very helpful. All right, gentlemen, thank you. Oh, sorry, Mr. Barnes.
Oh, just finally, Senator, if I may, I'd just like to put a quote into the record, if I could. A quote is, "We need to be guided by the experts, and we should look at the report from Public Health England. But it is promising that over 1 million people are estimated to have used e-cigarettes to help them quit or have replaced smoking with e-cigarettes completely. We should be making it clear that this is a very legitimate path for many people to improve their health and therefore the health of the nation." And I just want to point out that I didn't say that. That was the Prime Minister of the UK, David Cameron.
All right. Good note to end on. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Bates and Professor Stimson.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Good night. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Carpenter. I appear today as a representative of the Royal Australasian College of Physicians, and specifically as a member of the Australasian Faculty of Public Health Medicine's Policy Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Thank you for appearing today. I invite you to make a brief opening statement if you wish to do so, and then the committee will ask questions.
Thank you. Yes, the Royal Australasian College of Physicians consists of more than 20,000 fellows and members in New Zealand and Australia, across 8 divisions, faculties and chapters, covering a broad array of health and healthcare settings, including paediatric and adult, public health and occupational and environmental medicine. The college and its fellows have served the people of Australia and New Zealand for more than 75 years and continue to lead in the provision of medical care, research, advocacy, and to protect and promote the health of individuals, communities and populations. The role of physicians is to provide patients and their communities with expert advice, treatment and education to support and maintain health and encourage healthy behaviours. The RACP believes that the government has a key responsibility to protect and promote the public's health through supportive policies and appropriate regulation, through the provision of access to high-quality healthcare, and by protecting and promoting healthy environments in which people may live and work. Personal choices and community impacts are often inextricably linked, for example, in regard to the harms and costs of alcohol and tobacco use. Multifactorial policy interventions to limit the harms of tobacco to both individuals and those around them have played a major role in reducing the social, medical and economic costs of smoking over the last 30 years. The Royal Australasian College of Physicians believes the health of individuals must continue to be supported by government regulation, in order to address environmental factors which are beyond the control of individuals. Public policy has an important role in creating and maintaining an environment in which the Australian public are supported and enabled to make choices which promote their health and well-being. The College believes in the evidence-based evaluation and implementation of public policy to ensure it is appropriate and proportional to the nature of the health issue being addressed. In this regard, the role of research and evidence developed by the Fellows of the College to support public policy making is critical. The College and its Fellows are committed to continuing to develop and provide high-quality, evidence-based guidance to support policy which protects and promotes the health of individuals and populations. The College is grateful for the opportunity to make a submission and to appear before the hearing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carpenter.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Carpenter, I questioned one of the other witnesses about the death of a child in the US after ingesting liquid nicotine. I'm just wondering, can you tell us a bit about the toxicity of nicotine?
Thank you for your question.
In the liquid form in particular.
Yep. I can't comment specifically about the toxicology of nicotine. It is not my area of particular expertise. There are fellows of the college who are specialists in addiction medicine. I'd have to take that question on notice and get back to you with an answer from them.
Okay. So you're not familiar with that particular case of a young person who died in...
I'm not briefed on that particular case, I apologise, and I'm happy to take that on notice.
That's okay. That's all right. Are you familiar with the World Health Organization report on this issue in relation to... they call it, bear with me a second, electronic nicotine delivery systems?
I am familiar with electronic nicotine delivery systems and more generally with that report,
yeah.
But I'd have to refer to its contents specifically if you have specific questions in relation to the contents of that report.
Okay, well, perhaps the status of the report. It's relatively recent, 2014. It seems to me to be, to the layperson, it seems like an authoritative position on this particular issue. Can you just comment on what's the standing of that particular report?
I'm happy to comment more generally on the status of electronic nicotine delivery devices, and the college is considering evidence in relation to what is more colloquially termed e-cigarettes at the moment. The college is committed to providing evidence-based guidance to policymakers to protect and promote the public's health. In this regard, the college considers that the evidence regarding the safety of e-cigarettes is currently inconclusive. The college is considering all the available evidence and developing a policy statement in regard to e-cigarettes at present. We are concerned about the potential for e-cigarettes to represent a gateway of sorts to the uptake of tobacco smoking, in particular by vulnerable populations, including minors. And beyond that, the college, as I said, is preparing a position statement on that topic at the moment.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kedder. Dr. Carpenter, just for clarification, what's the difference between the Royal Australian College of Physicians and the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners?
Thank you, Senator. So the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners is the professional body representing the majority of general practitioners in Australia who provide medical care to individuals and to groups, usually as the first point of care in the community. The Royal Australasian College of Physicians consists of more than 20,000 members in Australia and New Zealand. They are made up of, our college is made up of 8 divisions and chapters representing specialists who work as, for example, paediatricians, cardiologists, respiratory physicians, occupational and environmental medicine physicians, public health physicians, and in faculties including the chapter of addiction, chapters including the chapter of addiction medicine and faculties of public health. In regards to the way in which medical care of individuals is constructed in the current financial arrangements of Medicare, for example, there is a gatekeeping function between the provision of medical services by general practitioners, whereby a patient is often referred to see a specialist physician of the college, when in the opinion of the general practitioner that patient would benefit from specialist advice, for example, from a cardiologist. In order for that specialist physician to receive the specific Medicare item number from that consultation, there must be a valid referral from a general practitioner. Otherwise, that specialist cannot claim the particular Medicare item in relation to that specialist consultation.
I was just curious, this is not a major issue, but curious, aren't there also colleges for some of these specialists? There's a paediatrician's college and a cardiologist's college and so forth? Or are they part of your group?
So certainly there are societies. So, for example, the Australian Society of Infectious Diseases is a professional body consisting of health professionals working in the prevention and care of infectious diseases. However, the body which accredits training and provides training for specialist physicians in infectious diseases is the Royal Australian College of Physicians. So in order for a doctor to qualify in that case as an infectious disease physician, recognised for the provision of services as such as an infectious disease physician, they must complete training and pass exams set by the Royal Australasian College of Physicians. Does that answer your question?
Are there any other specialities where the college sets the standards?
Yes, so in the Royal Australasian College of Physicians, the adult medicine division sets training for basic medical training in adult internal medicine, and once doctors who have completed that training pass an exam, they may then enter specialist training in cardiology, gastroenterology, respiratory medicine, infectious diseases, and so on, both in paediatric medicine and in adult medicine. So yes, there are a number of...
So it's an entry. It's an entry approval to go into those other fields.
Into those specialties. That's quite right.
Yeah, right. Understand. All right. Okay. Now I want to refer to your submission, if I can. On page 3 of your submission, I hope your pages are the same as mine. There is a statement that says many people, including children, have limited capacity to make informed, healthy choices.
Do you have a paragraph to refer to?
It's the third of the dot points on page 3.
Thank you, yes.
Okay. Many people, including children, have limited capacity to make informed, healthy choices. I was wondering if you can tell me who are those people apart from children?
So I think there's public health evidence to support the role of additional factors which contribute to the ability of individuals to make informed choices.
Now that's an answer to a different question. The question is, so your statement is many people, leave out the children bit, many people have limited capacity to make informed, healthy choices. Who are those many people?
So I can speak in general terms as to disadvantaged groups in society who, on the basis of public health evidence, are more likely to suffer harm and be at disadvantage in terms of their health behaviours and health outcomes. I think it would be pejorative of me to identify individuals on the basis of personal characteristics who would then necessarily be unable to make healthy choices. And that relates to the nature of public health evidence, in my opinion, whereby it is very difficult to say that an individual will, as a result of particular personal, socioeconomic, cultural and health characteristics, have difficulty making informed, healthy choices. But certainly there is a significant body of evidence to show the population risks relating to people with certain health characteristics.
Mm-hmm. So the obvious implication in that statement is that some people have a greater capacity to make informed, healthy choices on behalf of those people who have limited capacity. Would you agree?
I would agree that across the population we are all different in our capacity to understand and interpret a broad range of information, for example, financial information, occupational information, economic information, and so on and so forth. And I think that in relation to our ability to judge and make healthy behaviours, what is often termed health literacy, there's good evidence to support the notion that people do have inherently different abilities to judge and make choices in relation to their own health.
Do you think anybody could make better decisions about your health than you?
I don't think it's a question of whether another body or individual can make choices in relation to an individual's health better than them. I think it's more a question of the extra individual or extracorporeal influences on an individual's health. And in this regard, the College of Physicians is committed to providing evidence-based information to guide policy in this respect. We note that across a large range of studies and across a large range of health topics, the influence of environmental, occupational, social, economic and cultural factors on the health of individuals is undisputed, and it's our position that those factors are important contributions to the health of individuals.
Yes, I'm still curious about these people who have limited capacity to make informed, healthy choices and how that's to be remedied. I mean, the obvious implication is that there are people who have superior capacity to make informed, healthy choices, and the inference from that statement would suggest that they should in fact be the ones who make the choices for those who have limited capacity to make informed, healthy choices. Is that a reasonable inference from your statement?
No, and that was certainly not our intention.
That's not your intention?
That was not the intention of that statement. I wouldn't agree with that inference.
Okay.
The basis on which public health physicians and members of the college develop evidence is to study the population level associations with individuals' health, including their health literacy and ability to make informed health choices for themselves. And we recognise on the basis of that evidence that there are a broad range of factors which contribute to the health of individuals.
All right. Now, one other thing that I was curious to understand what your intention was in this submission is the first dot point. Individuals are not on a level playing field with industries that invest enormous amounts of time and money towards making unhealthy choices easier and more tempting. What are those industries and what are those unhealthy choices?
85% of the burden of disease in Australia today, measured in terms of disability adjusted life years, is, according to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, due to non-communicable diseases such as heart disease, cancer, rheumatological diseases, chronic lung disease and alcohol-related and smoking disease. Obesity and being overweight are some of the leading contributors to the burden of disease in Australia. And the vast majority of non-communicable diseases, it's accepted and published by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, can be prevented. In terms of unhealthy choices, we know that consumption of a diet which is high in energy-rich, low nutritional content food, that getting an insufficient intake of fruit and vegetables as recommended by the CSIRO, that having insufficient exercise and attaining weight, becoming overweight over time, are health behaviours which contribute unquestionably to an increased risk of preventable non-communicable disease. In terms of your question in relation to industries that invest amounts of money and time, I think it's certainly true of all industries which market products to Australian consumers that they have a legitimate business interest in marketing their products to Australian consumers. And I don't think any member of the college would dispute the right and role of those industries to market those products and substances to Australians in accordance with the relevant law in the jurisdictions in which they operate. From a public health point of view, our concern is in relation to unhealthy lifestyle risks and health behaviours which can adversely impact the health of individuals and populations over time. And in that respect, we are conscious that individuals have a limited ability to process complex information. So we know that once individuals are confronted with a very complex set of information, human beings have a limited capacity to process that information and make rational choices. And we are interested in supporting access to healthy lifestyles, healthy food and healthy environments to protect and promote the health of individuals in Australia.
Yes, but you haven't answered my question. What are those industries that make it easier, as you said, to make unhealthy choices, and easier and more tempting to make unhealthy choices? What are those industries?
So the college is concerned about the health risks to Australians in relation to prevalent causes of preventable disease in Australia.
Yeah.
So certainly leading causes of preventable ill health in Australia include obesity, lack of exercise, consumption of tobacco, and excessive consumption of alcohol. By no means do we wish to represent our position as wishing to interfere with the consumption in moderation of foodstuffs and beverages which have been shown to have no harm to individuals' health, but we know there is clear-cut evidence of the burden to individuals, communities and the Australian health system, for example, from excessive consumption of alcohol and tobacco. And that has been proven over many decades and through multiple lines of evidence.
You're still not answering my question, Dr. Carpenter. Which industries invest enormous amounts of time and money to make it easier to make unhealthy choices?
Well, the college, for example, has released a position paper which I'm happy to table.
And tell us what's in it.
In relation to alcohol. So, for example, the college's alcohol policy released in March 2016 entitled the Royal Australasian College of Physicians and the Royal Australasian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists Alcohol Policy, March 2016, and the college's brief of evidence in relation to alcohol promotion in sport entitled Through Children's Eyes, Alcohol Promotion in Sport, and I'm happy to table those documents.
This inquiry today is mainly around smoking and e-cigarettes, so we might not worry about that right now, thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
So certainly the college would consider that the advertising of alcohol and cigarette products to vulnerable populations, including minors, is a key concern for the health of Australians, and we would strongly support appropriate regulation to limit advertising of those products to minors through sporting and other events in Australia and through television advertising.
All right. We want to get on to the specific topic that's being discussed today. You've cited the Nuffield Centre for Bioethics and its monograph from 2007, Public Health Ethical Issues, in your submission, and you rely on it to a reasonable extent. It has been cited by other people with an interest in public health as well. It's also been adopted, or it's also been influential, if you like, in the UK. Nuffield's intervention ladder and its other recommendations have been applied, referred to by both the UK and by Australia. The thing is, they've come to different conclusions.
I'm sorry, when you refer to they, Senator?
Australia and the UK in policy terms.
So governments of Australia?
Governments, yes. And also public health organisations in the two countries have come to different conclusions. In the UK, for example, there's been recently Public Health England's rather substantial report onto e-cigarettes. they also have a different approach to the sale and service of alcohol and a different attitude to the use of bicycle helmets in Australia. That's 3 from 6 of the terms of reference in this inquiry. So, whereas Australia has a virtual prohibition on e-cigarettes, has substantially tighter regulations on sale and service of alcohol, and also is one of the few countries in the world that requires obligatory bicycle helmets. So, and yet they both ostensibly draw from Nuffield's work. How do you think this distinction has arisen?
I couldn't comment about the specific reasons about why different regulatory outcomes have arisen in the 2 different health systems. I certainly acknowledge that there are different regulatory approaches to these important health topics in both countries. But again, I couldn't comment as to the specifics of why they have arisen. I'd be happy to comment on the evidence base and what the college's position is in relation to those health topics.
Yeah. All right. Now, your submission expresses concerns that the introduction of e-cigarette regulations don't re-normalise smoking behaviour. That's on page 6 of your submission. And I don't think anybody would disagree with that. So this is a concern you've raised. Mm-hmm. Do you think that that is a real and present risk involved in e-cigarettes?
The college considers that the evidence is not conclusive yet to make an evidence-based determination about whether e-cigarettes represent a definite gateway to tobacco smoking, and in particular by minors. I'm certainly aware of Public Health England's report in relation to...
You are aware of that?
In relation to e-cigarettes.
They didn't think that there was a risk.
They've concluded, and it's my understanding, not that there isn't a risk, but they consider that on balance e-cigarettes may be safer on a population level. It's my understanding that e-cigarettes, the safety of e-cigarettes depends very much on the content of those e-cigarettes. The college is certainly considering the safety of e-cigarettes and its role in harm minimisation in relation to tobacco smoking in Australia.
So it's considering its position.
It's considering.
You don't have a, to use a contemporary term, a landing point on that yet?
The college is drafting a policy and position statement in relation to e-cigarettes at the moment, and it's considering the evidence in relation to e-cigarettes. Mm-hmm. The college is committed to reducing the harms of tobacco smoking in Australia. Mm-hmm. The college, and particularly the Faculty of Public Health Medicine, recognises the role of harm minimisation, mm-hmm. Where abstinence from harmful products may not be possible, and is certainly investigating what role, if any, e-cigarettes may play in preventing harm, in particular through continued exposure to tobacco smoking.
All right. So at the moment you don't have, you say this is under review, your policy is under review at the moment?
It's under, it's being drafted at the moment. Yep.
Well, all right. So I'm not going to be able to get you to commit a college view on this at the moment.
And not because I don't wish to be constructive to the Senate's legitimate inquiry into the role of e-cigarettes in public health in Australia. On the contrary, it's the college's desire to ensure that we contribute rigorous evidence-based advice to guide policy making, and because we don't feel we have a position to support that yet, I'm unable to comment further.
Mm. Well, okay, Public Health England has said in its report that there is a 95% reduction in harm risk achieved by replacing tobacco with e-cigarettes, and that 95% is a composite of a number of factors that they've taken into account. It's considered to be, a highly qualified and authoritative study. So the the arguments that have been presented to us earlier today are along the lines of, well, if smokers can't be induced to just quit, and that seems to be whose phone is ringing. If smokers just simply can't be induced to quit, and after all these years, I think that's probably a safe assumption, then harm reduction, as you've indicated, is a legitimate approach. So is the only issue from your college's point of view whether or not you accept that if it's not 95% less harmful, whether it's substantial?
I think there's a number of questions. We are certainly considering evidence from other jurisdictions in relation to e-cigarettes and their role in harm minimisation, as well as the role of e-cigarettes and marketing by companies who may seek to use e-cigarettes as a vehicle to normalise smoking behaviours and encourage uptake of tobacco smoking through the use of e-cigarettes. And so the college is considering not only evidence from jurisdictions such as the United Kingdom, but other evidence to ensure that we make an evidence-based recommendation using all available evidence, including any evidence of risk of harm through the adoption of e-cigarettes by individuals.
Yeah, so Public Health England, I agree, is not the only source of evidence on this issue. You've referred to two other sources in your submission, which is the US and Poland. We asked a couple of witnesses earlier today about those in which you've stated as a fact uptake amongst adolescents who had never previously smoked has more than tripled. And they disputed that. In the case of the United States, the suggestion was that adolescents had experimented at a higher level, but had not actually taken up consumption of e-cigarettes on an ongoing basis. That correlates also with Public Health England's observation that, like teenagers of any description, they try things, but there has been no ongoing uptake. In fact, their view is that, the Public Health England's view is that the number of people using e-cigarettes who have never smoked before is tiny. That's their view. So, I mean, is there anything about that you disagree with?
The evaluation of that evidence, including those published studies and evidence accumulated in other jurisdictions, is exactly the reason why the college wishes to incorporate all available evidence to reach an evidence-based policy position. We haven't yet had the opportunity to review all the available evidence. We've noted, as you point out, in references 30 and 31 in our submission on page 7, the potential for risk due to the use of e-cigarettes by adolescents in at least 2 other jurisdictions.
Earlier witnesses have said that that's not what those references are indicating.
I understand.
I'm not taking a view myself on it.
And I obviously was not privy to the earlier testimony, but it's the evaluation of those references and other evidence which the college is currently undertaking, and we use that by way of example to demonstrate why we have concerns about e-cigarettes and that we wish to consider all of the available evidence to reach an evidence-based policy position.
All right. So let's... when do you think the college will have considered all of this and have a position?
I'm sorry, I'd have to refer to the lead fellow in charge of that policy position and take that position, that question on notice.
Yeah, that's all right. Okay. So now, if I can just go further in your submission, when you start talking more broadly and in the context of vaccination rates, the college says writes here, believes that a punitive approach to policy, such as restricting access to other social benefits for unimmunised children and their families, is not the most effective way of increasing immunisation uptake. Instead, we favour an evidence-based approach to policies to improve vaccine uptake rate. So, in the case of vaccines, you're not in favour of the government's current policy of restricting access to childcare rebates for unimmunised children. Is that correct?
The college supports universal vaccination by all children to prevent communicable diseases, and vaccination, I will come directly to your question, but vaccination has been perhaps the single greatest achievement in the Australian healthcare system in the 19th and early 20th century, and has reduced the incidence and morbidity and mortality due to communicable diseases to a highly significant level. And fellows of the college have been instrumental in the research and development of vaccines, as has the government's creation and promotion of the Australian Child Immunisation Register to preventing the scourge of communicable diseases, which are still prevalent in other jurisdictions around the world. And we are incredibly lucky to have such an effective Australian childhood immunisation scheme. In regards to approaches to improving vaccination rates in Australia, the college believes that punishing vulnerable populations, socioeconomically vulnerable populations, for not vaccinating their children has the risk of potential health harms, and we would prefer to see other policies which promote vaccination through communication strategies which take account of, for example, disadvantaged groups who are culturally and linguistically diverse or socioeconomically disadvantaged, based on public health evidence, as opposed to financially punitive policies which affect the most socioeconomically disadvantaged groups in Australia.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, because you have previously in your submission said you favour financial incentives.
Could you point out where, so I'd be happy to refer to the...
Yes. Well, I think that, well, speaking more generally, yes, there is somewhere of financially... Yes, page 3, the paragraph under the dot points. You say measures such as tobacco and alcohol taxes ensure individual consumers bear some of the costs to government and are financially motivated towards limiting risky behaviour. So I guess the point I'm talking about here is there is a financial incentive to have your kid vaccinated, and you're opposed to that.
We think there are alternative policies which would be less punitive, and I think therein lies a distinction between positive and punitive financial incentives, and I think economists would certainly...
It's money going into your pocket or out of your pocket, that kind of a similar sort of thing. But the evidence we've heard this morning would suggest that those people paying the heaviest penalty for continuing to smoke cigarettes are those most disadvantaged in society. The highest rates of smoking are in the lowest socioeconomic groups, the most vulnerable groups. We had evidence this morning of figures, ranging from in the 80 percentages, which somebody disputed as saying was too low, for prisoners, drug consumers of illicit drugs, coming down to Indigenous, low-income people, and so forth. So, in other words, the most vulnerable, the lowest socioeconomic groups, are still the ones who continue to smoke. So they're paying for this disincentive, if you like, to smoke. And you're in favour of that, but you're not in favour of a financial penalty to encourage parents to have their children vaccinated.
I think they're fundamentally different public health issues. On the one hand, you've got a substance which has 43 known different carcinogens in tobacco smoke. with very strong evidence of harm to individuals, that there's no safe level of smoking. And I certainly agree that the prevalence of smoking is higher amongst socioeconomically disadvantaged populations, and that therefore flat consumption taxes, so for example tobacco taxes, disproportionately affect more socioeconomically disadvantaged groups. I think that's a matter of economics and mathematics, and there's no question of that. Mm-hmm. I think that's a different financial issue because it's providing a disincentive against a harmful health behaviour, in this case consumption through inhalation of a known carcinogen, versus incentives or punitive incentives for not vaccinating a child. I agree that they are both financial incentives, of course, that's obvious. But in this case, regarding vaccination, that's a positive health behaviour with very large health benefits. And the college is concerned that punitive measures in restricting access to welfare benefits by families eligible for Family Tax Benefit Part A who don't vaccinate their children in a timely way, for example, may dissuade them from engaging with healthcare providers in the future, or may have adverse health consequence for those individuals. And we would favour alternative evidence-based policies to improving vaccination rates in Australia.
Mm-hmm. So the logical, in the case of cigarettes and e-cigarettes, the logic would be that if the Public Health England's assessment of e-cigarettes representing 95% reduction in harm compared to tobacco, then you would presumably support the cost of e-cigarettes being 95% lower than the cost of cigarettes, would you?
No, I think there's separate issues, and I'm not sure there's a logical nexus between financial incentives not to smoke and proposing a subsidy for the cost of e-cigarettes.
No, I was talking about a subsidy.
So sorry, I may have misunderstood when you said a 95% lower cost of e-cigarettes. I may have misinterpreted that.
Yeah, well, that may just be a consequence of the government's tax policy rather than so it may just be levying a less level of tax on e-cigarettes than it does on tobacco, so that the end result is that a consumer has a choice between an e-cigarette and a tobacco cigarette, and the cost of the e-cigarette is 95% lower.
And again, because the college is still determining its position on e-cigarettes,
you're not in any position to say, yeah.
We absolutely support the role of harm minimisation. Fellows of the Faculty of Public Health Medicine, for example, are actively involved in the medically supervised injection centre in Sydney for the harm minimisation of injecting drug use.
The college supports that?
We do not support injecting drug use. We support harm minimisation, and there is evidence that
the managed injection room.
We support strategies to reduce the harm of injecting drug use in Australia, and Australia's official drug policy has been harm minimisation for some 2 decades now. I note that the current government has recently agreed to subsidise the cost of treatment for hepatitis C in this country. Because of the burden of hepatitis C in this country, with an estimated more than 230,000 people infected with chronic hepatitis C, there are enormous personal, social and economic costs to the community. And the college was very pleased to see the government supporting PBS funding of therapy to eradicate hepatitis C from Australia. We would like to see this and other strategies to eradicate hepatitis C and other communicable diseases from Australia.
What's its view on the safe injecting rooms, though?
I can't speak as to the official. No, it's not that I don't know. I can't speak as to the position. I'd have to confer and take your position on notice.
Okay, all right. I don't want to put you on the spot on any more issues, so...
happy to answer more questions.
No. Thank you very much. Dr. Carpenter. That concludes today's hearing. Thank you to all the witnesses who appeared. The committee stands adjourned.